To order. Let's see here. Okay, sorry, I'm a little bit slow on the roll this morning. I've got meeting objectives today to review the comments on chapters 5 and 6 and introduce 7 and 8. Finish the development of the policy, regulatory, and legislative recommendations, and start working on an implementation plan in the afternoon. Do I have a motion to approve our meeting objectives?
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Okay. Motion's passed. You also should have received via email the minutes from our November 13th meeting. We all had a chance to review those. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And then I will, motion passed. I will turn, I don't know what you've got in regards to anything special with this meeting or housekeeping. Turn it over to you.
I don't think we have anything special. I know we sent out the policy.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute. To you or Scott, we sit on Water SC, just want to give a quick update on that first meeting and or the next meeting, which is tomorrow.
I think we've had two, right? We've
Or
had
three,
two,
yeah, two.
right? I'm trying to keep up.
Yeah.
That's fine. It's all
Second
good.
and third, yeah.
So we've had two meetings. We've gotten some preliminary data information. And I've been tasked with bringing feedback back. I'll be honest with you. I think you all received an excess of information compared to what we've received in this, short period of time. We've got a great task ahead of us. I think our next meeting tomorrow will provide maybe a little bit more insight as to how aggressively they're going to go after what questions they might specifically have. I'm sorry, I know I'm going all over the place here, but it really had to, as far as I'm concerned, it's been a couple days of information pushed to those of us in attendance. And hopefully we'll get a little bit more of the ask of what our task is and what questions that they're looking to answer. Scott, would you like to pick up on my whatever?
I don't disagree. I think the first two meetings were focused on trying to encourage us to engage with our stakeholders. If you will, there's about 6 or 8 different sectors that are represented on this 25-person committee. And Joe and I and Christy and Craig down in Columbia are the ones that represent the water. Every sector in the room has a representative on there. There's 5 state departments that are members of this committee, department heads. So I mean, it should be a well-represented group, but they have a lot of talk, but not a lot of detail early. At the last meeting, because we were charged with 2 things. Number one is to write a report to this legislative committee that was set up under the last budget proviso. It's going to make recommendations for changes to state law. We were told to have a report to them by January, and sure y'all figured out by now, I'm not the most patient person. Rather than continue to talk about outreach with open-ended, I had asked DNR or DES, DNR was doing planning, but I've asked DES to come back to us and describe what they consider to be the successes, the failures, the opportunities. I want their perspective on how they think the Surface Permitting Act was working. Until we actually have a hard conversation about what's working and what they think the problems are, I don't know why we're even talking about modifying and looking at the law. If there's no problems with it, we don't need to talk about it. If it's all problems, we need to think we have a big problem. We do need to talk about it. So to not point out what's working and what's not working, what were some unintended consequences, I think is a failure. That's what's going to happen tomorrow. So I guess we will hear, for those of you who have nothing better to do, SCETV is broadcasting it, I believe, live. I would encourage you to plug in and at least hear what DES has to say, their perspective of the Surface Water Permitting Act. That's really what they're focusing on. And it says the state of water, or water resources in South Carolina. I don't think there's any questions that the Groundwater Act is working for the capacity use areas, and the Groundwater Act is working on the state. I think it's probably very successful. There may be some things they want to tweak on it, like the permits or something, but it seems to be a very successful program at managing that resource. Not so certain about the upstate. We'll hear what the DES says, and that will actually, I think, give us every stakeholder and every person in the state an opportunity to comment, because we'll actually hear what they think. Asking for input as they've done so far without a hard question of what you want input on, I don't think it's very productive. If you just ask for input, I think Clemson played a great game last Saturday night. I don't think that's relevant to the conversation or the meeting that we have here. So I think that's what I would suggest, is that we're about to get more pointed and more direct on what our charge is. And I think this is the opportunity for everyone to pay attention. If you have a comment, you can either push it back up through the representative on the committee that represents your sector. If you don't, call them. I'll listen to what you have to say, and I'll try to make sure your points are mentioned or, represented. It's whatever you feel most comfortable doing, whether it's a person, regardless of sector, or your sector, make it happen. Get your input out there. That's the one way I can guarantee that you'll be, what you think is considered. If you assume that someone else is going to carry the water for you, there may be no water in the bucket. So I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. One of the things that DS asked me to do at tomorrow's Water SC meeting for a very short time, about 10 minutes, is I'm going to try to summarize the commonalities between River Basin Council's recommendations as they relate to policy, legislation, and regulation. So earlier, or a couple of days ago, I sent out that combined list of RBC recommendations in this category of recommendations, including yours. And we've kind of distilled that down to say, here's where there was a lot of consensus between RBCs. Here, there's a little less consensus. Here, maybe where there wasn't much consensus at all. But that's kind of just to give a picture and some of the feedback from the RBCs to Water SC. So I'm glad Jill and Scott will be there, because if I say something that mischaracterizes your recommendations, you guys have to speak up. That's the plan. Okay, Tom, who is online from the RBC, so we know?
We've got 3 right now: Cole Rogers, Jeff Phillips, and Dan Murray.
Okay. All right. Public comment. Anybody from the public or agency like to make comment online or in the room? And Sam, you have a guest. I don't recognize. You want to introduce your guest?
So this is Chris Whitmire with the South Carolina Department. He's my supervisor. So he just wanted to come with a couple of RDCs and kind of see what's going on, see the discussion that happens. So a lot of times I'll go to him and let him know some stuff that happened and stuff we talk about. And here to listen and learn. Happy to be here.
Great. Glad to have you. Thanks. Okay, let's do a quick review of what we talked about in November. We did give you some more technical information, probably one of the last pieces of technical information that you'll get were the draft plans together. And we talked about the modeling that we did to evaluate increasing sedimentation. So if sedimentation rates continue at the rate that we've seen since construction, which is anywhere from 7 to 14% in the 3 Army Corps lakes, all the way through 2070, 2072, that means there'd be less volume of water to utilize. So we applied the high demand scenario model to those projections. And if you recall, we didn't see a lot of change looking at that orange and gray line. And this is just Lake Thurman as an example. And here we're focusing on the 2002 drought period. There's certainly a difference from that loss in storage, but not a significant reduction. So that's just additional information to consider with regard to impacts of sedimentation on the reservoirs. Any questions about that? Okay. All right. We also finished up talking about technical recommendations, and we You didn't bring the buckets today, but a little disappointed.
Sorry, I thought everybody got a good gist.
Yeah.
They understand the red bucket now.
It's funny, after last week's Lower Savannah Salcahatchee meeting, we actually started talking about recommendations. And after the meeting, one of the members sent me a picture of a bunch of colored buckets. He's like, "Do you want me to bring these at the next meeting?" I said, "It's already been done." We've done it, so. We green bucketed these 3 technical recommendations, stream flow gauge locations, recommending funding for those as identified by DES and agencies. Requests cost share of the completion of the phase 2 comprehensive study, encourage that we're proactive in incorporating drought forecasting and decision-making, and then additional fish and invertebrate data should be collected to further the flow ecology relationships in the Blue Ridge. Recurring funding. So we started talking about policy, legislative, regulatory recommendations, and that's what we're going to finish today. We got through a good number of them, had some great discussion. First one was, recommending that the legislature authorize recurring funding to continue planning, establish a grant program to support implementation. Those were both generally common themes that we've seen in the other RBCs. For the most part, they've agreed to those or some variation of them. And then reasonable use. Reasonable use is probably the recommendation that's most common amongst all the RBCs. Y'all put a little bit of a spin on it when you focused on just new surface water withdrawals. Okay, so that's where we left off on recommendations. We're going to pick up there and figure out if we need any more recommendations before we move on to the implementation plan. Any questions about what we talked about in November? Okay. All right. I've given you all a deadline, I think, of Monday to provide comments on chapters 5 and 6. And I did get 3 or 4 folks submit comments. Harry, Katie, I think Mark Warner, who's going to be joining us late today. And I might have gotten some emails from other folks that said, no comment, but just to make sure y'all have a chance to review that, extended that deadline till this Friday. So if you still want to submit comments, please do so. Especially if there's information that focuses on your sector in chapter 6. We talk about just the general toolbox of strategies in chapter 6. And if you have input on how we characterize those strategies, and I'm looking at you, Daniel, and back, like the ag strategies, if you guys say, yeah, this doesn't apply to our basin, you need to soften this or take it out, let us know. 6 again kind of presents the strategies that we talked about. What I haven't given you yet, because I'm a little behind, is chapter 7, which is a short chapter, but it says, okay, here's the water management strategies that y'all agreed to and that we want to promote and recommend. So we've got the basis for that chapter written. I just have not finished it yet. Plus, I want to give you a little more time to review 5 and 6 before I send those out. Even though 7 and 8 are very short chapters, they won't take you long to review. I don't want to overlap too much. So you'll get those in a week or two once we've wrapped up the comments on 5 and 6, or receiving the comments on 5 and 6. I do want to talk about a few quick comments that were received on 5 and 6. So let me pull those up. Remember, we've got a comment log that we're keeping, and right now I'm showing the comments for chapter 5 and 6. We've generally addressed all these comments, and we've got an updated chapter that we can send out. But what I'll probably do is just send that out when the full draft plan is together, because most of the comments are fairly easy to address, and they're not really, they don't need a lot of discussion. I'm trying to just think of a few examples, like Harry, suggesting remove the word likely in a couple spots. And I can't remember the context of that, but rereading that, yeah, it made sense to take that out. There was one I wanted to talk about in chapter 6, which has to do with this large table where we present all of the different strategies. And it's near the end, and within this table, we touch on some of the evaluation criteria. And this table is color-coded to generally group the criteria into different levels of effects. Red is potentially moderate or high adverse effects. Less red is lower effects. White is neutral. And then green is low positive effects, or dark green positive high effects. And, we're presenting the strategies, and then with each one of the criteria across the top, we're just subjectively characterizing them as to their level of effect. Positive, negative, low, medium, high. Harry had a comment, I think, on the reclaimed water one, which I think it was this one. And you guys probably can't read that. Let me make it a little bigger. Under socioeconomic effects, again, which is a subjective criteria, we had highlighted that as red, so kind of moderate, low to moderate impacts on socioeconomics, which is basically costs to the ratepayer if you're implementing recycled water or reclaimed water program. That's what this one's all about, is reclaimed water programs. And the comment said that, what we've written here was that moderate anticipated effects, higher initial water bills to finance reclaimed water program could be offset by long-term savings from postponing the need for new supplies of raw water treatment facilities. The need to hire operation staff could contribute to the rate increase. Harry, your suggestion is that's probably more of a higher impact potentially. Right?
Especially if you've got a lot of infrastructure issue, you have to distribute that, but you have to certify different
Operators, yeah.
Quality of water. It just seemed like our argument was arguing for a higher level.
Right. So his recommendation was make this more of a darker red. And again, these are subjective. We've kind of picked what we thought based on initial thought, and a lot of this has already, so a lot of the same strategies are in each RBC, and we've had some minor discussions in the other RBCs about should they be no effect or moderate effect or high effect. And we've tweaked them along the way, but I like Harry's suggestion. If y'all think this one should be ranked as a darker red, so higher impact for socioeconomic effects, we would change it. I know I'm getting into the details here, but I don't want to just blindly say I agree with Harry. I want to hear what the RBC has to say.
We don't know the numbers exactly. We're just saying high and low and things like that. So it's hard to go with. Hard to go. I don't know the real bit. So.
Yeah.
I think the other is, it depends on what penetration level you're looking for the use of reclaimed water. If you're talking about dragging purple pipe down the street and delivering it to every customer, it would be a high cost. Yeah, I see. If you're talking about targeting, and you're only going to target golf courses and large irrigation, it's not really expensive.
Right.
So it is, depends on the implementation.
Yeah.
Does the economics take care of the issue, or do they reflect the reality of the issue? The reality is it's cheaper to get the water, not reusable. That's the reality. But are there considerations beyond the economics of the considerations? They would be not reflected.
Yes, I mean, so are you talking about the other criteria, the other categories, environmental impacts, reliability, consistency of the regulation? Yeah.
No, that's not dollars and cents.
Right. Yeah, we've kind of already.
It's just a good thing to do for some reason.
Yeah. That's kind of why you see, green and white boxes for the other criteria.
Right.
This criteria, there's definitely a cost to it. There could be a long-term savings in the right situation, but again, you're pretty well off for water supply in this basin. Not a big driver for reclaimed water. Not that it couldn't make sense in an isolated instance where you've got a golf course right next to a water treatment plant or a wastewater treatment plant. With little additional treatment, you could provide all the irrigation they need. But I don't know of any examples of that right now, or similar examples. So
I would defer to Harry. Harry's got a lot of experience with this. Harry, that's good.
Well, that's what I say, and also for Scott, I mean, when you start distributing gray water, whatever you want to call it, there's different levels of gray, and
right.
If you're going to do any kind of wine, I think it's only more practical on the example you gave, something that's close by where you don't have. I think there used to be some of that done, not in South Carolina. I think over in that golf course outside of Overton. I think they used to do some, because there were areas that they always say,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Hilton Head Public Supply District does a lot of it. They provide pretty much all the water that the golf courses down there need on Hilton Head through reclaimed water. It works for them. It makes sense.
No, it's either going to have to be a large irrigator or a large industry. It's going to be using water process. It's entirely situational.
Yeah. Okay.
Whether it's a minor impact or to be,
Well, this brings up a bigger question I had.
Huh?
This brings up a question I had about this whole section. Okay, these are recommendations. If this is kind of like a guideline and stuff to make people think in the plan, we're not telling people exactly how to do this. Kind of like you go back to the ag and I will go back to, okay, the type of irrigation or the type of crops, that's all very specific, like he says, an individual. And this plan is not supposed to tell you how to do that. It's just recommended practices, like if you so desire or not aware of. They know what the scope of this chapter is.
That's a good way to characterize it for this basin, since he didn't really have any identified really big issues or shortages where we had to say, okay, we need to figure out new supply, what's it going to be? For your basin, it's more, what makes sense to help improve water use efficiency where needed and more wisely use water. So you're exactly right.
Okay, recommended practices and that kind of dovetails into the best management practices.
Exactly, conservation.
Right.
It's just conservation, and that would used to be the place that you look first. In any industry was just conservation practices inside the plant. They usually have the water use in most things that I work in.
Yeah, you gotta be careful in that from other industry and experience I've been, we had recommended practices for decades. And then all of a sudden regulatory takes it up and recommended practices become regulation. And then, yes, I do get a little more intense there.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good.
Okay, we'll probably make it darker red, but I may clarify in this box here that it's specific to each application and it could vary. Is that
It is
okay?
a general basin thing. In our basin, it's not really a low hanging fruit.
Right. Right.
Good way.
Okay. Oops, that I think was really the only comment that I wanted to specifically discuss. Harry, you had a comment back on chapter 5. Where did it go now?
Harry, I'm impressed. You really worked me too.
That's what happens when you have cataract surgery and you can't go out.
Oh, and I guess the cataract surgery worked then.
You didn't have somebody read it all to you, did you?
No, sort of managed. Thank God for blowing up on the computer. You change your view.
Yeah. You might not be able to read this. Maybe I should make it bigger. But you had a comment about one of the tables in chapter 6, which referenced McCormick's drought plan. And whether it was referencing full pool as 330 feet mean sea level or the guide curve.
Yeah, it makes it. Some people used to call it full winter pool, but the point is, most people say pool, like in Lake Thurman, they think 330.
Mhm.
And I just comment that if you read it that way, that wasn't much of a drought if there.
Yeah. But
In the winter, they go down 4 feet on the standard guide curve. So if it was 5 feet, it means 1 foot below. The guide curve is a drought, probably not.
well, Cheryl clarified it did full pool meant 330 feet elevation. So
Yeah, that's what it should be.
yeah, okay, good. I thought that's what you meant. I don't think it requires any change, but unless you think we should clarify that in the table that full pool means 330.
And then, in this case, it's surge. Some people call it the summer full pool.
Okay.
Whatever you want to call
Okay. Okay, I think that's really one of the only ones. Well, I do want to mention one more. Katie, you had a comment about, this was under the discussion in chapter 6, talking about education and outreach. And you had a good comment saying that, well, there's a lot of organizations that already do this. It might be wise to include something about coordinating with existing groups, continue support for existing education outreach efforts. And that's a timely comment because as we're working on our implementation plan, I think that needs to be acknowledged in the implementation plan. You guys are going to have limited capacity to do education and outreach, but you can encourage those existing groups and provide support to the existing groups to continue that. So we'll have to remember to wrap that into an action as we discuss the implementation plan later today. Okay, again, you have till Friday if you want to provide additional comments on 5 and 6. Otherwise, given the comments we've got, and the fact that we've wrapped them up, we can resend out those, but what I'll probably do is, since there's very few comments, is just include them in the complete plan that we provide, probably in late January, assuming we get through our recommendations discussion today and through most of the implementation plan development today. There's nothing really left that we need input from you to be able to prepare the draft plan. So we'll be working on that later December, January, and the goal is to get that to you probably late January. All right. That brings us to next topic, which is finish our discussion and development of policy, legislative vision, and regulatory recommendations. So we had a Lower Savannah Salkehatchie meeting last week, and because of the upcoming Water SC meeting, where they're thinking about these type of recommendations, and we wanted to be able to give a full picture to Water SC with regard to all the RBCs that are currently active. We kind of moved up their discussion of policy, regulatory, and legislative recommendations, and spent the whole meeting talking about it pretty much. And they settled on 5 here, and you'll see some similarities to the ones that you all settled on, which are noted with your initials, US. But there were some differences they talked about. One thing I think we'd like to do is, for those of you that volunteered early last year or early this year to serve on the Inner River Basin Council, is get together the Inner River Basin Council, so you folks in Lower Savannah Salkehatchie in early January, to review all of your recommendations, specifically these, and decide, do you want to tweak them so there's more consistency? Are they consistent enough? Is there any additional recommendations that y'all want to consider before we finalize your plan and draft of Chapter 9? So look for a potential meeting, and it may just be a virtual meeting, to focus on recommendations and consistency of recommendations between your council and the Lower Savannah Salkehatchie. So let me go through these really quick. The first one, again, this is where there's been commonalities between all of the RBCs, is the concept of reasonable use. They also felt that the surface water law should allow for reasonable use criteria to be applied like they do for groundwater. So no real discussion there. The second one, improve the current laws that allow for regulation of water use so that they are effective and enforceable. That one has to do with the grandfathering. So remember, we talked about 94% or so of water users are grandfathered, and there's not a lot of enforcement. I shouldn't say enforcement necessarily, but there's not a lot of management around that because they've been given an amount of water. Generally, they don't have to abide by, not generally, they don't have to abide by minimum stream flow requirements like new users would need to, new permits would need to, I should clarify. So there's not a whole lot of way to manage the use of water resources, since the majority of folks are already permitted or registered. So you all talked about that, the Broad talked about that, and you made a general recommendation that there needs to be some improvement to make them effective and enforceable. You didn't really say what that improvement is yet. That's where there's not as much consensus how to fix it. But there's at least recognition that grandfathering may not allow effective management of the resource 20, 30, 40 years into the future, as there's more demands and potentially more severe droughts. So they agreed. The third one, this one was centered around the funding recommendation that you and others made, and they softened it a little bit. They said, well, let's not mention funding. Let's let the legislature decide whether it needs to have funding and how much. Let's just say that we recognize the state's growing rapidly. There's increasing demands for water resources. Water resources are finite, but planning should continue. But they pulled the funding part out of the recommendation. So a subtle tweak. Fourth one was related to implementation. And this one, they didn't pull the funding part. They agreed, yeah, there's probably the need for some type of grant program to help with implementation. Otherwise, why are we going through all this planning work? If we can't implement any of these things, then not much point to it. So they agreed with the one that you and the PD supported. And then the last one, the Broad had a recommendation about water withdrawal permitting process should assess the permit applicant's alignment with the river basin plans. You remember your discussion around that? You decided, yeah, we don't want that recommendation. Lower Savannah Salcahatchee said, well, we think it should align with the legislatively approved state water plan. Their discussion focused on, well, these river basin plans aren't legislatively approved. They're just approved by the river basin councils, but there's not as much impetus behind, or not, that's not the right word. Because they weren't legislatively approved, they felt like they needed to tie that to something that did get approved by the legislature. And they said, that's the state water plan. And they felt that the permitting process was kind of reworked, then the plan should be part of the, should be reviewed when DES is deciding on whether to approve a permit. Yes.
Looking at all these, and particularly the last one, the one recommendation I would actually have that was different from all the other plans in the state. Whatever state water plan is developed, the legislatively. The past plans have not been. They've been completed, but they have not been legislatively approved. There's been no stamp that they're anything other than income payment. So I think even to make the last one self-enacting, you have to have a step of saying we would ask that the product, the final product of this, all 8 basins in the state of Virginia be submitted and legislatively approved.
Not just the state plan, all river basin plans.
Well, I mean, the basin plans are part of it. Those are appendices in the state plan. That whatever the state plan is, that it be approved by the legislature. But previous plans have not been approved.
Okay. We talked about this a little bit, and I don't remember if it was the Lower Savannah Salcahatchee meeting or another meeting, Scott, but I thought there was, maybe it's not in the executive order, but I thought there was the expectation that the legislature would be reviewing and either approving or not approving the plan, but I guess that's not etched in stone, or it's not part of that executive order, or do you recall?
You might have to ask Joe,
Yeah.
I inquired about it.
Okay, well,
I understand
there's ambiguity,
we're supposed to complete the executive order from the governor is that we're to complete the state water plan. It doesn't say, it never talks about what it does, and what its filing is. It just completed. Which is the same thing they did in 04, which is the same thing they did in 98, which is nice, but if the legislature doesn't get to the step of approving the plan, they probably have less skin in the game toward recognizing the recommendations that are in the plan, such as funding, such as continuing water planning. I mean, it's nice for us to say that, but we're just a rowdy mass outside of Capitol steps unless they approve it.
Even if they do, I mean,
They can still walk away.
well, isn't the analogy like every county has a long range plan for zoning, for instance? Well, those plans are just summarily dismissed when it comes to an individual zoning request between that council.
Well, Scott's right, and in the fact that I said this second meeting, we're pretty much, my term, I always like to use one dressing. Because like I said, it's been put on the shelf. And unfortunately, and you're right, if you're gonna do this and you're gonna have it, the governor's got to do it, but it's the legislature has the political will to endorse and say, this is what we're gonna do. And unfortunately, prior experience, don't know if the new legislature will be that way. They're not gonna want, a lot of them aren't gonna want to endorse because if the next BMW comes down the line and okay, well, we got this, but no, economic development, Department of Commerce, like, no, we can't have that. That's going to be the heavy lift to see if they're serious about all this. And now y'all got SC water, and we got we've talked about this before. Where is it all going to land? There's so much swirling around this, but who's going to finally say? Will they say great, this is what we need to do. And guess what? Like I know, one legislature is not making a reaction to the prior legislature. The next one can come along and say, no, that was stupid, and got the votes to do it, and they'll kill it.
But
So this is an excuse for them to do what they want to do.
well,
This is cover for them to do what they want to
it
do.
is, but at the same time, if you make that your first recommendation, which we actually expect this, the work product to be taken seriously. You have to recognize that, yes, you can always be overruled. And it doesn't even have to be the next legislature, it can just be the next act. Okay? We can change the law next week. We can make a law this week and change it next week. So that's not a problem. The goal is to get them to start thinking that this is as serious as we're taking it. And I think everybody here is committed for 18 months to make this work. I mean, serious. I mean, I wouldn't do it if it's not serious. I got better things to do.
No, you're right. If they don't pass it, then they should fund some kind of continuing work if they're serious about it.
So that would just be my observation, is that we say that we want to make it aligned with a legislatively approved state water plan, but at no point do we ever say that the first thing we want you to do is to look at the plan. Please make comments on it, but we would really like it to be adopted or approved.
So sounds like you're proposing a recommendation that we haven't talked about
It is.
before. So what do y'all think? Do you all agree with that recommendation that the Upper Savannah RBC requests that the legislature adopt and approve the state water plan once complete?
I do agree with that.
Yeah, that's dumb. They basically said that the way you got that written with the legislative approved state water plan. So I mean,
They were just assuming it would be.
they was either right, and we know what, yeah.
I'm not going to assume.
Yeah, we know what that does.
Exactly. I think we will on the show.
And I'll be honest, I would have made that my first recommendation, period. They're not gonna do that, the rest of them don't mean very much.
No, exercise.
Now, when I just proposed, what I thought I heard you say, I said the state water plan. Do you want to be specific about including the river basin plans?
I think the river basin, well, that's to get into what I believe is the second charge of the water SC. All the base, and I'll also tell you, I've been pushing for basin planning for 16 years, so I'm not willing to let it kind of like die. All right, even if we don't come up with ideas, if all of our recommendations don't make it into the state plan, that doesn't make what we did invalid. What it means is that at the state level, there wasn't a strong enough consensus for it to be a state level initiative. That doesn't mean that the basin plans are appropriate. I would suggest that they can pick and choose. If they think we're a bunch of crazy people, pitchforks, and they think things need to be struck, they strike those. All right, they make that comment as they adopt them. But I would hope that all the river basin plans would survive in full as appendices to the state plan. And the state plan would pull from the appendices the things that the commonalities and the really good ideas. And I think I was sharing with Katie yesterday, and it doesn't require 5 basins or 6 basins to have the same recommendation for it to make a state plan. If a single basin happens to have the most brilliant idea and the other 7 of us just didn't know it, and we just overlooked it, that doesn't mean that one brilliant idea shouldn't be in the state plan. That's what the charge of, I believe, DES, who's over the plan, the Water SC Committee, and the legislature, pull up the wisdom that's in the plans, regardless of how many people say it. If it's the right thing, it's the right thing. I mean, some of us are cheated because of when we went in the process. And we were talking yesterday. We've had the benefit of those who've gone before us. A lot of ours have been, yep, we approve, we want to modify, we agree, we disagree. People that did Eddystone PD didn't have that.
Right.
That doesn't make them less smart. It just means we get to look at all they did and we get to build on it.
Right.
And that's what I would hope the state plan would do. It would build upon all 8. Not necessarily saying that any one of them is superior to you. The ideas that come out of one basin superior to the other. It's just, people who went last had an advantage. The Santee should be quicker. They're gonna have seen a lot, they're gonna have 7 other folks that are gonna have been through the list. But they may still come up with the one brilliant idea that we all missed.
Okay, just to clarify, the recommendation will be kind of what's in bold, and then the text that we've got underneath supporting it, you know, we can reference the river basin plans and the assumption that they're appended to the state plan. Everybody comfortable with that? And online folks, if you have any comments, let us know.
The advantage is they become then kind of a permanent reference. You can go back and look at those plans. As the state water plan gets updated every, whatever it's going to be.
Okay.
So it kind of freezes them in time, you know, so. So there.
Okay. All right. So the other ones that we didn't get to last month that we kind of hinted that we talk about because they've been raised during discussion. First one has to do with potential recommendation for a joint compact or some type of water management group or planning group to be established and funded that would focus. Well, this example is the Yadkin PD in North Carolina, South Carolina. So this was a PD recommendation. Do you want something very similar for South Carolina and Georgia with regard to the Savannah, Upper Ogeechee and the Savannah side of Georgia with your group? You want a similar recommendation as what the PD did, but for Georgia. Is collaborative planning important? And actually, you and I were talking earlier. The Savannah Upper Ogeechee Regional Council didn't necessarily go as far as saying you need to establish a joint planning group, but they said there should be more collaboration.
Yeah, continue efforts. They kind of left it open, continue efforts to collaborate, you know, as needed. These are their recommendations directly to the state. There's one explicitly that talks about coordination. At the time, it was DHEC and DNR, but other committees and planning groups in general. That's kind of how they bundled it together.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Tanya's raised this before. Is she online or? Okay, unfortunately, Tanya's not here, but I think she's pushed for interstate collaboration.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, she has. Yeah, and it's weaved throughout the plan, specifically Savannah for Ogeechee, because we have shared water resources, obviously, but yeah, the recommendation, I can read the line specifically from this plan, and it just says continue to coordinate with South Carolina DHEC and South Carolina DNR on the Savannah River water resources. That's the statement for the interstate, but
So you maybe have multiple options. You could just leave it alone and not make any recommendation. You could make a softer recommendation about continued collaboration and coordination, or you could make a stronger recommendation about, you know, these groups should be meeting
yeah,
frequently together and doing what you're doing, but as a combined group, kind of like the Catawba Water Management Group, funded through user fees and everything, but it's a good example of an interstate water management agency that actually gets a lot done.
Well, yeah, I wish that this is Tanya's thing, but like I said since the beginning, but okay, if they communicated, then Georgia could put the bid with fear that everybody over here said, but they're gonna pipe all the water, but it like. I mean, nobody talks, that state line is always a, no, that's a foreign country, we can't talk to those people, they're from Georgia.
Substituting straw in Savannah would be a significant thing to us to head to Atlanta, you know.
Right, I mean, I'm being facetious here, but yeah. Yeah, we don't communicate, that's, and we share a river.
I think we had some good concept, well, I don't want to speak for the group, but I think we had some early conversations that did point in the direction of additional collaboration.
Yeah, that's what I remember hearing. So it's
Couple things. I think the governor is probably behind water planning a little bit more so than our previous governor, because he went to court with North Carolina and no evidence. The one thing I would put out there is that it's less likely we're going to waste money on lawyers if we start talking sooner rather than later. If you wait until there's a problem, it's really, really difficult to resolve without lawyers. And they have a lot of costs. And sometimes provide value. I will say never. Sometimes provide value. But I would suggest that having some coordination is probably a good idea. Asking our legislature to endorse creating a standing group is probably going to be a bridge too far for them. But, we talk about if it gets implemented. The recommendation, something similar to what Georgia has written, that we should find ways to increase that communication up to and including standing, inter-river council would probably be an appropriate recommendation.
Do you want committee this goes to? Do you want a committee oversees such things as this? In the legislature? We would have to pass through committee, no doubt, somewhere.
It depends on House or Senate.
Yeah, I don't know, but there are two committees there. I don't know what committees actually.
On the House side, the guy that you got to convince, well, obviously you got to convince him now anyway, he's over everything, is Davey Hyatt.
So we have names, just go.
And then the next guy we've got is a representative from Edgefield County. So those are those, I don't know, on the House side. But I think just start with a compact is a legal instrument. That's a completely different animal. I think something closer to what Georgia had is probably going to be a better recommendation.
Okay.
A recommendation more likely to succeed.
Okay.
Can we just reflect the Georgia recommendation for our Georgia agencies?
You still have that up, the actual recommendation that mentioned collaboration, coordination?
Yeah, that's the. Okay. If I found it.
Can you read it? I'll
Oh, yeah.
type it here.
Oh, yeah, it just says continue to coordinate with. This is not gonna apply anymore, but I guess is this, you want to do it for Georgia or with?
Yeah,
Georgia?
yeah, we'll just flip the
Yeah,
agencies.
So I guess the state agency you would want to reference is Georgia EPD. So continue to coordinate with Georgia EPD on Savannah River water resources.
And I'm sure this is outside of CDM scope, but you guys have done a lot of work into bridging that gap anyways. We have the connection.
Definitely, yeah.
Do you want to add some specificity to this and say, including joint meetings of existing planning groups, something like that?
I would advocate for that to be a little bit stronger than what it is, just because if you leave it that broad and open-ended, I don't think that anything would come through.
So maybe increase coordination.
Or do you want like identify a committee?
Do we
that-
have coordination there?
A little bit. I mean, Scott has given presentations to Savannah, Upper Ogeechee. We've had,
I just want to make sure continue is the right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Established.
I think there's already a group that talks about, that tries to coordinate water use and some of the water resources issues on their roads. Dean Moss was negotiating working with the folks down there on the roads.
They've had, it's not specifically water conservation, but they've had some joint resolutions a few years ago, looking at things like life jacket rules and concealed carry and hunting regulations and how many fish you can take a day. Because there used to be differences. Life jackets especially, there was a 2-year difference. So depending on which DNR happened to run into you in the lake.
Where's the line?
It's 12 years old and 10 years old. So they were trying to coordinate some of those things. It's a little different than what we're trying to do. They have tried to work some of those.
But there's a precedent.
Okay. Any suggestions on wordsmithing? Kind of strengthen this? Again, we can try to capture the discussion in the narrative below the recommendation. I really want to just capture the bold part of the recommendation, make sure you're comfortable with it. That, okay. Yep, all right. We'll go with that and we'll add some narrative below it to further explain it. Okay, the PD had a recommendation about the state supporting and funding RBC-led and statewide water education programs, include all sectors of water use, include types of water management strategies recommended in the river basins. I've included that one because it really wasn't an explicit recommendation from any of the other RBCs, but I thought it merited discussion. You all think it's necessary? Do you like it? We'll include it.
Teaching kids that water is important, I guess. That's it's an increasingly scarce resource, but I don't understand about teaching adults about it. It's still, I don't understand, I guess.
You can't teach an old dog new trick kind of thing.
No, it's not that. It's that, what you're here to talk about, just awareness of what you're doing. And so I don't know how those, I'm not sure how that is.
When you start talking about funding, you go on road funding from something else.
Hmm.
You start talking about funding, you're on road funding from something else, and I would think, you would hope the municipalities and the water people would have that some of that would be covered, you know, in the municipalities.
If you wanted to expand it, you could say education and outreach.
Is this an add-on to the seed grant money dialogue?
So, well, I guess I didn't see a lot of overlap because the seed grant ones focused on implementation. I guess implementation could be implementing a education outreach program. But I don't think, at least the example I gave for Georgia, they don't implement that type of thing. It's more money going to municipalities and other water users for projects and studies that.
I was wondering if you could consolidate for asking for all of these individual implementation, outreach, education. You're talking about the state supporting and funding, if we could bring it all under one umbrella. So it'd be more likely for it holistically to be adopted and funded versus one out of the three.
You could do that if you want to, yeah. Or you could do that and then prioritize the funding, saying we think the most important money should first be spent on implementation, but we also think secondly, planning should continue. We also think, you know, state-led water education and outreach is important. You can do whatever you want. It's up to you all.
So that MC programs developed and such that there's sectors for people to apply for, outreach, planning.
Yeah, that's an idea too.
There, in the Savannah Bergici plan, there is a funding category recommendation that also has like some examples or actions like that. That's separate from coordination. So there's a funding recommendation that has some activities identified and then a coordination recommendation. So they do something like that as well, where they try to grab what they think needs to be funded. But for example, one of the funding recommendations is coordinate with EPD to develop additional funding to help further implement and improve agriculture, programs. So it could be whatever, I guess, whatever you feel like you want to identify funding for.
Yeah.
I have a question. And Tom, you might be way on this, probably closer than anybody. Why would not statewide education programs focus on managing water resources, not be in the wheelhouse of extension service? That would be a statewide organization. They have connections to education to be able to help. I mean, maybe not deliver it. I'm not saying go to be the one that does it, but at least to kind of coordinate, and kind of develop materials and try to coordinate a program. Does that kind of sound like the purpose of extension service?
Well, potentially.
I mean, and they work. I mean, schools wouldn't be that different than hitting farmers and businesses. I mean, it just seems like that's the mission of, Thomas Green Clemson kind of.
Land grant college.
Yeah.
Charter.
And we've got Carolina Claire and all that, and as a Clemson graduate, and on several committees, what he would have to do is to get the people at Clemson to learn how to utilize the IT people, so everybody could get the email. because it's so segmented in Clemson. But yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's part of mission. I mean, you go back to Smith Lever and all that, and rural health and whatever. I mean, that would dovetail into, yeah, we do it. I mean, yeah, we do it at Capital's program. We talk about water and then we equip and the EPA, I mean,
It
USDA.
just looks like that would be the whole. I mean, I would just ask, if Tom would take the lead, just ask. Is that something that, would they be accepting of a recommendation that encouraged a more thorough use of our extension service to help deliver that message?
I wouldn't comment on
I was
extension because I don't work with, I'm not in extension.
I understand, but you're as close as I got.
Heather is a
Can we ask
lot
Heather?
closer to that than I am.
So I'm Heather Nix. I'm a water resource agent with Clemson Extension. Nice to meet those of you that haven't met yet. Yeah, I mean, certainly we do a lot of water resource education across the state. We have some features already that are focused on or kind of aligned with water cleaning. We have some land grant press articles that talk about the regulations for surface water withdrawal and groundwater withdrawal, and try to make it like sort of easy language for everyone to get up to speed on what those regulations are. So we do already have some of that stuff. And that's part of why I'm here, is that I try to kind of keep an eye on like the pulse of it and then see if there are opportunities that could fit in with our existing workloads in order to help educate. But certainly we do presentations on water planning and on different things like that. I'd be happy to hear ideas for what y'all might want to see, and I can't, commit to doing those directly and immediately, but certainly I think that's something that we would be really interested in knowing, is like, how specifically would you want presentations on it? Do you want articles on it? Do you want an online course? Like, what do y'all think would be the most helpful outreach methods?
Tell Dobbins that Beatty said that he's an ag education by training, and we see a golden opportunity for him to prove it.
But you have the framework also on the same slide. And maybe what this can do is maybe some additional funding your get some stuff done.
Is that the question, or is that the key to Heather? If your group extension service was to do more of this and expand on it, you would need more agents, more funding.
Yes,
Yes,
likely.
yeah.
I would assume that would typically be.
Okay.
From my perspective, that would look to be the most efficient thing to do, just do it statewide, rather than rely on, 200 and something water systems and God knows how many farmers and, to put that together.
Well, you're absolutely right, because, okay, you got every county, every city, they don't communicate. There's an extension office in every county, and there's one umbrella, it's called.
I like it.
Yeah.
An existing proven.
Is the extension service funded directly from the legislature, or is it passed through some other agencies and then to you, or?
I believe that it is like, we're part of like state recurring funds for many jobs, but it comes through a part of the university. I think that gets a little bit,
And it's,
it is legislative.
but it's kind of earmarked, this much goes to the extension service.
And then there are like some of the specific jobs are funded differently. So someone mentioned Carolina Clear. So most of the water resource agents at Extension are largely funded through like partnerships with MS4s. And so they have very specific tasks that they need to be focused on and need to complete, but typically are more focused on water quality issues related to wastewater runoff. I mean, that's kind of what they're helping with those. But really, if y'all have specific suggestions, the more specific you could be of like who the target audiences would be and how you think it could be most effective at getting the information out, like I think we would be glad to hear that, and that could certainly help us direct our efforts easily. So.
Okay. Going back to your suggestion, which is maybe you could wrap this up in an overall funding suggestion. We could talk about funding for planning, implementation, education outreach. We can do that. I guess the question I want to answer first is, and I heard a little bit of mixed signals beginning at the start of the discussion versus now. Do you think that there should be more education and outreach? And do you support additional funding to increase the level? It's already there, given by Clemson and other groups. And this is where we get into the comment that Katie made in chapter 6. Clemson Extension is not the only one doing this. I mean, Upstate Forever does a lot of education and outreach towards conservation and their causes, but
We work with a lot of organizations across the upstate that do a lot of this stuff already. So I think that my comment is more getting at identify what is being done and how we can support and increase what is currently being done so that we're not duplicating efforts anywhere.
I was thinking sort of along those lines, but Heather's comments, is there a place we can see everything we offer now? So that, yeah, I don't want to fund duplicating efforts.
No, I wouldn't either. And when my comment was more to help develop materials and what we're gonna have partners. I mean, we're not gonna walk away from what we're doing, but that doesn't mean we need to all create brand new materials. That's inefficient.
And you talk about funding, the thing of it is, I know everybody, and trust me, I did the 2 pots of money and all that, I won't bore you with all that for years. But the agents are already there. It's not gonna need increase in funding. They're gonna have, if you give them material and tell them to integrate this in current programming, it won't cost any money. I like that.
so the way this is now, we just say it should support and fund. We're not saying increase funding. Is that general enough without saying throw more money at it? But let's figure out how we can leverage existing resources to do this. The RBC's role, maybe this comes in your implementation plan, but we just talked about this. You might want to say, hey, Heather, we think it'd be great if Clemson could talk about these water conservation strategies that we've promoted in our plan. Is that kind of what you're looking for? I mean, that's an easy thing to implement because you can just say, hey, take our plan. Here's what we think needs to be done. Here's some of our strategies. Can you help us promote these? Yeah, Sam.
Just to add a comment, I'd be wary about asking more of an extension, even though they may be doing a lot of these efforts. I'd be wary about asking more of an extension without the opportunity for funding, because agent turnover is very high in extension. I was a former agent now.
Okay.
And just,
Workload is really high on extension agents right now. So I mean, if you take the
I
same.
think it's probably the fundamental difference between recognizing that there may be some additional cost as opposed to throwing money at something to develop an entirely new set of programs.
yeah.
And that's why it's important to establish what programs are already being offered, figuring out ways to make sure that the RBC shows support for it. And then if additional programs are needed, then you can move forward, and which more than likely would require additional funding.
We want to tweak, we want to create, we want to tweak.
It's like the state legislator, so a couple of years ago mandated that extension give a statewide pay increase, but it's not more than good funds.
A lot of the water resource
And just-
positions are funded by endless forest too.
And just to add-
Paying specifically for the water quality programs.
Yeah. So just to add to that, like we do have offices in every county across the state with varying levels of staff. So some of those offices might only have 2 staff members, neither of which is focused on water resources. We only have 3 across the entire state. We only have 3 water resource agents that focus on regional issues. So like I cover 11 counties throughout the upstate, and we only have 2 others. We currently have like the 2 vacancies, but then that was supposed to have 5. But so it's like, we would probably be the ones that would be most aligned with focusing on this type of work, but there are very few of us, so. That helps.
You have funding for 5, you just don't have bodies in those positions.
I think we have funding at the current time for 4.
Oh.
But the state was originally split into 5, but yeah, not to get too many ones.
Okay. Okay, well, as written, or as sort of written on the board, are you comfortable with that? Do you want to strengthen it? Do you want to be more specific about anything?
The specificity inclusion. I think so.
When you say extension service, you want to say.
No, I just think that specificity is
Two
here.
extension services.
It's just a good idea, you know?
There is two extension services in the state of South Carolina, so when you say that extension, you're not saying this one. You got 1890 extension through South Carolina State too.
What's the other one?
1890 extension through South Carolina State.
South Carolina State, yeah, with 18.
So we should not just specify Clemson.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
We're in upstate. No, but he's right. I mean, yeah, when you say extension, it is too. It is SC State, it does have a site. It has very similar role in some things, but most people don't recognize them, but you don't see them that much.
I had heard it, but I forgot about
Yeah, that's right, because they're not as busy as much.
it.
Yeah. Okay.
They are in the upstate.
Yep. So I'm going there.
Yeah, I don't know, anyway, the government.
They have, I don't know if they have 46 offices, but I know they have regional offices. Like most of the folks that cover the Anderson area, are housed in regional.
Yeah.
But they are expanding. They've got a bunch of funds to rebuild a bunch of their offices and upgrade a lot of their facilities. And they used to be in the West Side Community Center. I don't know about that.
It's probably better funding than trying to get more for Clemson, right?
Good point.
All right, for the sake of time, I'm going to leave it at this. It sounds like everybody's kind of in agreement. We'll try to add additional language to reflect the tone of the discussion and then let you all react to it when you review chapter 9. In the meantime, if you have specific recommendations after the meeting, let me know. Okay, one other one that the PD discussed was and approved was that the DES should provide guidance on how RVCs should interface with other organizations. Tom or Scott, I don't know if you remember discussion around that one at all, or if there's any context behind it. I thought it was an interesting one that wasn't discussed or promoted as a recommendation in the other councils, but apparently it was part of the PD. Do you remember? Either you? No, okay. If y'all don't really want to promote it, include it, we don't have to. Again, I'm not sure what the discussion centered around. It was just one of their recommendations. Maybe there was some uncertainty.
Maybe there are concerns that RVCs weren't integrating dialogue with outside groups in their areas, like folks that will be doing the implementation, that type of thing.
That could have been likely, yeah. Yeah.
There was some discussion about kind of creating like another group, like Catawba Water Management Group, that's the PE based, and maybe it has something to do with that, but since it's still DES as an oversight, you know, how do they interact with other groups to do this?
Well, this might be doing implementation through, Coney Beautiful or something closer. I know it's keeping somebody beautiful. Lawrence, I know, has one, right? That aren't necessarily at the River Basin Council, so I don't know if we necessarily need guidance.
Yeah.
We should be encouraged to interface with organizations that will assist in implementation, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. I'm not hearing any strong push that you need a recommendation to help clarify your role and how you should interface, so probably just going to remove it. Nobody feels that strongly about it. Okay. Okay, that was that covered all of the other recommendations that we haven't really discussed that have been adopted by other councils. That doesn't mean though that you might want to, this is your last chance, I guess, to identify and develop your own recommendation. And that's one reason I sent out that long list of compiled recommendations from all the other RBCs. I see some of you have a copy of that. Is there anything on that list or anything not on that list that you think is important that you want to include as a policy, legislative, or regulatory focused recommendation? Going once. Going twice. Sold.
Sold as presented.
Sold as presented. Okay. Again, when you read chapter 9, you may have an epiphany and you may say, you know what, we forgot about something or other. I think this is important. But we'll have a last chance when we review the draft plan to maybe add a recommendation, but that last chance window is almost closed. All right. Before we get into our next and final topic for the day, which is working through the implementation plan, let's take a break. So it's 11:11. Let's go till about 11:20, and then we'll start up again and work for 40 minutes or so, and then break for lunch. And that's good too, because Jill can be here until noon. So we'll kind of do big picture implementation plan, and then we'll start diving into the actions. But I think we can probably get through most of this. We've got a start of a plan, so I don't think it's going to take a lot of time to work through it. So let's, online folks, we'll start back up in about 10 minutes, 11:20, 11:21. Okay.
I won't ever forget you. Karen's you that. There is no worries there.
All right, we gave you a preview. We're recording, right? All right, we gave you a preview of the implementation plan at the last meeting and how it's organized, at least. I'm just going to refresh you on that before we dive into the draft table that we've already started putting together. The implementation plan follows the framework outlined in the state water planning framework document, where we identify overarching objectives, and then we couch our strategies and then actions within those objectives. And we've attempted to do that. We want to run that by you first. Each action needs to have kind of a schedule to it, and that's generally, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4 through 5 for the short-term actions within that 5-year window that the planning framework recommends. Then there's also some long-term actions that we'll identify as well. So we want to touch on schedule for each action, and then budget. And for budget, it's generally kind of a broad, like, well, if we were to implement, or DES was to implement, or somebody else this study, it could be $50,000. It could be $200,000. It could be $1 million. We don't have any high cost actions because we haven't identified any water management strategies like build a new reservoir. So our budget is going to be kind of general, and it's just based on best guess for what it might take to do education and outreach, or to do some of the technical recommendations that you've come up with. So that's kind of how the implementation plan is organized. Objectives, in those objectives, we've got multiple strategies, and then for each strategy, sometimes there's multiple actions, and each one has budget and schedule. Okay. Each of the River Basin councils that have done this process so far, their recommendations, we've reviewed their recommendations, and that's what turns into the implementation plan for the most part. Generally, the planning process and technical recommendations. The recommendations that we've been talking about the last couple of months, which are policy, legislative, and regulatory, sometimes those don't even find their way into the implementation plan because they're just recommendations to the legislature. Now, sometimes we do have an action in there like, we need to continue to lobby for this policy change. So you may see some of that in there, but for the most part, the technical and the planning process recommendations are what are reflected in the implementation plan. And those generally fall, at least the ones that you came up with, within these 6 objectives. As we go through the strategies and actions that we've drafted already, based on your recommendations, I want you all to decide, did we put them in the right objective? Do we need all these objectives? The first one's pretty straightforward. The toolbox of strategies that we've talked about pretty much all fall within improve water use efficiency and conserve water resources. The next one, communicate, coordinate, promote findings and recommendations from the River Basin Plan. That one may have some overlap with this 6th objective, promote engagement in the water planning process, but we'll let you decide when you see the strategies that we've put underneath each one of those objectives. We might, decide to eliminate these 2 and combine them into one. Improve technical understanding of water resource management issues is generally where a lot of your technical recommendations fall. Protect water resources, kind of broke that out as a separate one because you've identified a number of recommendations focused on things like sedimentation and land use impacts on sedimentation. So we've suggested maybe that goes under a separate objective, protect water resources. And then we've already talked about drought management strategies that are going to be documented in Chapter 8. Those generally fall under improved drought management. And you had some specific recommendations to that. So we'll get to those too. So we're going to go through each one of the strategies and actions and think about the objectives that they fall under. We're going to come back to this then, decide, do we want to prioritize any of these objectives over the others? And it could be like, yeah, we'll prioritize them 1 through 6 after reorganizing them, or you may just may say, no, they're all important, or you may just say like high, medium, or low. It's up to you what you want to do, but we want to try to prioritize them in some form or fashion. And then we want to provide a justification why we think we're more of a priority than others. That's at the big picture level. We're also going to prioritize within each objective the strategies and the actions. And you may say there is really no priority, so we won't prioritize them, but we want to at least do the exercise. Okay, that's what I just talked about, that box. So we're going to try to finalize our implementation plan today. That's a later slide anyway. So you're going to hit escape and then pull up the Excel table. Okay, I'm going to start by just showing you the broad implementation plan. And the reason I'm showing you this is they've already had 2 meetings to start working on their actions and strategies. So what I've given them is an Excel table that has their implementation plan, their 5-year implementation plan. It's got the strategies listed. Here's the first objective, improve water use efficiency and conservation. Here's their strategy. Here's their actions, which talk about, when they're supposed to get it done. Ignore long-term goals and objectives for now. It says the responsible parties, and then scroll over to the right, Ashley. Choose the arrow keys. There you go. Keep going. Got a little bit on budget and potential funding sources. And what they're doing now is tracking the status of their implementation activities. So after we finish the River Basin plan, and assuming you continue to meet, whether it's quarterly or twice a year or whatever frequency, the goal and what I recommend to you is that you kind of track what's going on and you assign responsibility. So you track the status and you can include comments. So that's one way you're going to use your implementation plan if you continue to meet. Scroll down because I want to just show that the Broad's already done a good job implementing some of their strategies. Keep going down on that column so we can see the ones where they've implemented. Scroll down. So they had some actual supply side strategies because they had a shortage on the upper part of the Broad. Cherokee Board of Public Works wasn't going to have enough water, and they've already done work to pull their old intake back, or to evaluate their old intake. They're already negotiating with an interconnection with Spartanburg Water, and that all was precipitated by the River Basin plan results. So they've worked on these specific supply side issues. Keep scrolling down. Spartanburg Water has already started working on one of the recommendations. Keep going. Related to evaluating sedimentation in their reservoirs. And it's, I can't remember where it is. You'll have to keep scrolling down. Oh. And I'm sorry, it keeps probably throwing you on the left side because of merged cells, but it wasn't under drought management, but that's okay. I think you get the picture. The picture is that here's one. These were some that were related to education and outreach, and they continued to hold meetings, which is one of the recommendations. They've done some outreach where they've done presentations at the Water Resources Conference that Clemson gives, and they're organizing something for the South Carolina Environmental Conference in March to continue to do education and outreach. So that's where you're heading. There's one where they had a recommendation about understanding how we can prioritize land use. Michelle Eddy of RTI talked about how they use the waterfall model and how they've used it in the Catawba water remanagement to look at the impacts of changing land use and use that to prioritize conservation areas. That was one of their recommendations. So they've learned more about that and they're trying to figure out, could we fund that? What do utilities fund that? Could we, move forward with that somehow? There's the Spartanburg water. They've done some reservoir studies to look at sedimentation. So, okay. Pull up the other spreadsheet then, which is the one that we've started for the Upper Savannah. Should be one those are all ones that are recent. Sorry, it's broad. It should just be up here. Oh. Yeah, this one. Okay. Okay, so starting with objective 1, this has been very similar for all the RVCs. It's where we just put in those toolbox of strategies based on water use sector. And we usually start with municipal conservation. Actually, Mark, you had a comment in chapter 5. Should we be calling this municipal since we've got special purpose districts and we've got authorities and we've got other entities? And we did add clarification at the beginning of chapter 5 that says when we refer to municipal conservation, we're talking about all of those entities that provide water to the public. So municipal conservation, we identified these strategies. They're discussed in chapter 6. We spent a little bit of time talking about how these should be prioritized. And, Scott especially said, well, public education should be first and foremost. We also then talked about, well, conservation pricing structures are important and have impact, as do leak detection and water loss. Those may be second, and then everything else, depending on the utility and the situation and the location, is likely to be third. But that was generally the priority that we heard during the discussion. Everybody generally agree with that?
Good question. And
Yeah.
forgive me if this is in another section. Did we have like regular updating and monitoring the drought plans in this section or in another section?
So that's under a drought plan stress. So it's mentioned in chapter 8, which you haven't seen yet, as one of your recommendations. And it's also part of the implementation plan where we basically just encourage utilities through education and outreach to update their drought management plan.
So it's included just.
So it's included, not under this objective. Yeah. We created a special drought management response objective for it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We can come back to this priority if you're not comfortable with it, but I think that's kind of what we heard with regard to this toolbox of strategies. Scroll over to the 5-year actions. Okay. We've put some actions in here for you to contemplate. If you don't like them, we can remove them. We could reorder them. We could change them. But one of them is just, if you're pushing these strategies and you're telling utilities, hey, you should, or ag users or whatever, right now we're talking about municipal utilities. If you should do, more leak detection or water loss control programs, they probably need funding, right? So one thing is just to help them identify funding opportunities. It's very general action, but it's probably needed. The second action potentially is, well, are these being are these implementing these strategies? Is it being is it effective in lowering per capita water demands? We won't know unless you do kind of a baseline, trying to figure out what's the current per capita water utilities. And if we're effective in getting funding and having some utilities implement these programs, whatever they might be, is that causing per capita water demands to drop? So that's a way to see if these strategies are effective or not. So the broad RBC said, yeah, we should try to establish some type of baseline per capita water use, and then over time track that. Some utilities already do that, probably. Well, you guys are a wholesaler. I don't know if you do.
So we're immediately doing that.
Yeah.
I would go so far as to say my observation in South Carolina is many utilities would have a difficult time doing a residential watering base.
We couldn't know that.
Because of the way they aggregate and the way they don't break the building down into, it's just customers.
Yeah. I've heard different things.
That kind of has a problem. That's its own problem. It doesn't do single family, multifamily, commercial, industrial with 8 classes. They don't do that. We're not that complex for a lot of systems. And even some of them should be more complex. 200,000 people that we serve, we're wholesale. So everything's invisible to us. One of the things that, when you say establish a residential baseline, I would suggest that, we live in an age right now where, smart meters are almost everywhere. Okay. And right on down to the smallest systems now have electronic read, they have smart meters. Those smart meter systems, we could seek funding to have a representative sample taken for, across the state or across our basin, across wherever, of agencies that have those smart meters in place, and we could actually find out what actual end use water use is. That would be one step, probably more disaggregated than a baseline residential water, because you actually see what people use in water. That's how accurate those meters are. They tell you if you're using it for, bathing or cooking or, washing your clothes. My understanding of the level of knowledge of those meters, particularly with some of that AI that's out there, they hate to say it, the world's snooping in on them.
Big brother is watching.
They know that you take the showers too long, or they know you skip a shower. So I suggest that might be something rather than, if you want to be more direct, to actually look at end use levels, take advantage of the technology that's in place, basin-wide or statewide, to get actual end use data. That would help drive whatever conservation messaging you're in. If you just tell me that my average water use is 120 gallons per person per day, 140 or 190, whatever it may be, that's nice. And you're right, we can ratchet down. We were doing that in the city of Phoenix in the 1980s. If you do an end use level study, you can say that we're using X amount of water for irrigation. And that lets us know that that's where we should be targeting our education. We should be targeting our education and irrigation. Or we're using X amount for washing clothes. Which tells us that, for some reason, we haven't caught on to the high efficiency water, washing machines here yet. Or showers, or whatever it may be. I just think you get a little bit more information that would help you drive your other programs if you focus on end use rather than baseline you got.
Okay. What do others think about that?
Is that something, what you're really talking about, you say that a lot of places have the data available, but analyzing the data would be another thing entirely. So maybe that's a C grant.
But that's why I said we would need funding to pull a revenue. And I wouldn't suggest that we do, you don't need to do 2 million of them. If there's 2 million accounts society, we don't need to do all 2 million. You just need a sample. I'm talking to you guys at CDM, y'all do these studies.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with how would you figure out the end use just from a smart meter? Is it based on the time of day and making assumptions about
amount of use? Apparently they're really good at telling you what your use is. If you ever look at your power bill and it tells you how much you use for heating, how much you use for cooking, how much you use for lighting.
Yeah.
It has a certain characteristic based off flow and time of day.
But the use, whether it be how you're using the water done on algorithm. With the smart meter, how does it know what you're using water for?
Because of the use levels, the length of time.
And so basically that,
there's
an algorithm to do that.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
They're deducing.
Yeah, they're deducing that as an algorithm. Never mind. Thank God I'm all well.
We'll get you next.
Shovel.
Yeah.
Brother hasn't forgotten you just because you're on the way.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So Scott's got a different recommendation than just doing a per capita baseline. And in the broad, there were several utilities that felt like, yeah, we actually already try to track that and we have a good idea of residential per capita. But other utilities said what you said is that, yeah, we can't really figure that out. We don't have enough meter capability and our systems don't distinguish that. So we can't really figure it out. There's a mixed message. But Scott's suggestion is different. What do you all think? Do you think that's worth including as an action to help advance these strategies, decide what's most important to advance and what you should recommend?
Scott, do you know what districts or what companies in our region have those smart meters that can get that data?
Do I know which ones?
Do you know? We don't have.
Most of the folks, when was the last time your system did a meter retrofit? We're changing meters.
We're doing them as we get there.
So is Scott on?
What about Green?
We don't have smart.
Sorry, Jeff.
That was also why I suggested, I don't think you need, you don't have to have everybody. You have to have a representative sample. If you don't have them, the Seneca out. You know, that's really what I'm asking. And you don't have to do everybody. You need a sample.
Yeah, Jeff Phillips,
I don't-
you guys have smart meters throughout your whole system, right?
Nope.
No. You have them at all.
196,000 meters. We don't have any smart meters.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we made the conversion before they became prevalent, and when you're talking 196,000 meters, it's just unless there's a desire or need to switch them out, it's just starts getting cost prohibitive.
Okay. And I've missed the discussion. Is there anybody that you figured out that does have them in this basin?
If we do have them, we don't have the capacity or the ability right now to access that data or don't know where to get it from, so.
I
Okay,
think, unless I know they're just in my system. Powdersville's online. I think Patrick's moving that way here. So we're not talking, it's not have to be, there is a significant cost. So you do have to look at when you do your meter change outs, when you do your swap outs. That's the direction folks are moving.
But what we're looking for is, do we have enough meters to get the representative sample?
That's enough.
To do
Maybe
the
the question, based on Jeff's response, take the survey and find out. Just ask.
and then we might have enough data to actually make a conclusion for the general public from what we.
so you could start small. You could have an action of survey the upper Savannah water utilities to see who has smart meter capabilities. That might lead to a second action of try to identify funding to do like a pilot. Take some information from one of those and see if it's useful to identify how much water is being used for different types of use. So what I just said, does that make sense to you all? Do you think those are useful actions to kind of advance these strategies?
It would lead to the place that says, if you have a problem, or even if, where would you go first to figure out what to do?
Right.
Where's that they would have data supporting.
Where's the most opportunity to improve?
And I'd say,
Water
to me,
use.
that's probably worth.
Okay.
action.
So I think we would get rid of establish a baseline to get rid of number 2 there. And
I
say,
have a problem with establishing a baseline. I just think you can go one step beyond that. And you may not have enough.
if you don't think you can establish a baseline because there's not enough information on residential per capita demand.
I think looking at the entire Savannah River Basin, the same difficulties that would be in place to establish a residential baseline would be in place for establishing end-use water, end-use water. Like a data.
I think more data is good. I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah, I
just the feasibility of it, but I don't have any heartburn over the actual principle itself.
I think my general thought is much like yours. If you have data, you can use it. If you don't, you don't. And why wouldn't you want to have more data if you're going to design a program? If you want to conserve water in 30 years, you don't want to be aiming at things that are already efficient.
Well, obviously, Powdersville has decided, I mean, they're utilizing available technology, that the rest that Greenville couldn't. I mean, as time progresses, people use available technology.
And so to the extent that they're representative of the state, you can use them as the poll, just like we use polls in elections. So
Is that a large amount of samples?
that's a statistical issue. So that'd be a statistical question. There's some math and there's some.
Okay.
I think your recommendation, let's put it that way. Take the poll, find out the same, the survey, find out who's got the data.
Yep.
And if the data exists, then be prepared to move on. I would still keep your baseline there, because it's not a worthless exercise. It just may be difficult to get.
Yeah, okay.
So keep that one and add.
So the baseline one, which I had you delete, keep that one, right? And then add one that says, do a survey of utilities to identify those that have automatic meter, so AMI or AMR, basically, either one.
And this is separate. or
It'd be a
this is-
separate action, yeah. So just hit return or.
Huge one.
See if that would be. No.
Actually, if you hit Alt return, then you can do a. Alt enter. There you go. Yeah.
We got something.
I'll renumber.
We got something.
So yeah, you can renumber them later. But
Hey, that's where you get screwed up my day because now.
and you just put
I'm
notes
thinking,
in there. We can
okay,
pull out the language later, but just say
The shower.
survey to look
Lady, you
for
take
AMI, AMR.
7-minute showers, we got to take you to the re-education facility. Because you're not supposed to take a shower for 15 minutes.
The folks that have these programs in place, just about will tell you, their customers like it. They can fix the leak. They call them, they tell them there's a leak. And it's just from day one,
Yes, sir.
regularly to get into the billing cycle when you have an $800.
Then the next step after 3 would
Mark,
be
that y'all, all these smart meetings like this, we might be around all the leaks.
They need meters.
Alt enter. Yep. Next step would be
They don't know
to
where the meters they have.
determine if
Did I say that?
uh,
You're like-
study could be done to identify
In use.
to identify end use, right,
And they.
to help target conservation practices,
Magic.
to help prioritize and help better prioritize water efficiency and conservation measures or something.
That's where we get part of our water.
Okay, I think we've captured the discussion here. We'll maybe suggest taking baby steps and move, some of this to like the long-term beyond 5-year strategy. At least now we can try to establish a baseline and figure out where this capability exists. I don't want to overwhelm this RBC with a bunch of actions that you need to keep doing because we've got a lot more to go through. Okay. When you're done there, go down to the next one, which is focused on ag. And Mac and Daniel, from information that you told us, we looked at a bunch of different strategies and you said, these are all just best management practices. We don't really want to tell each farmer what they should be doing. They just should know, and they probably already generally do know what's out there, and it might work for them or it might not. You gave some good examples, Daniel, of like soil amendment, cover crops. The soil in your area was already, can't remember the example you said, but it didn't really work for you because soil type that you have, but it doesn't mean it wouldn't work for somebody else. So we've kind of generalized it and we just said, here's some that may be there, but it's a toolbox of strategies and applicability will vary depending on location, operations, what you're growing, whatever. Move over to the strategies for this one. Again, funding opportunities, and we've got a table that we'll show you later that's mainly USDA and EQIP type funding, typical sources for ag. Education and outreach would just be the second one. So, just having people aware of what we looked at in the River Basin Plan. Individual water users implement those conservation practices as if they're able to get funding and they agree that, yes, I haven't been doing this, but I probably should because it'll lower my energy bill or whatever. The one on here then is, I guess you should decide, is this important enough in this basin or is ag usage not important enough that you need to develop a survey of practices, the funding issues and funding sources as part of your 5-year plan updates. Basically, if you do a 5-year plan update, you want to look back and say, we put forth these toolbox of strategies. How many growers implemented these strategies in the last 5 years and haven't had the success, or it's just not really needed because there's only a handful of water users that irrigate in this basin, and we shouldn't even really be focusing on this. So the last one is probably primarily just to kind of do a survey, and that would require education and outreach, somehow reaching out to those folks that have registrations to say, what have you done in the last 5 years? Has it been effective, or are we wasting our time talking about ag irrigation strategies?
Question is going to help inform the discussion tomorrow. At the last Water SC meeting, someone alluded to the fact that, Clemson University Extension Service apparently can do, I don't know if they do it, I don't know how broad it is, they come out and score, how efficient someone is at their, 70, 80, 90, whatever. I don't know what the scores mean. I don't know the range. Is that a correct statement? And does it cost anything?
Is that irrigation trailer?
I think they used to. I don't know if the grant is still there. It was a free service at one time, and it was a voluntary basis. I think now it costs something.
They have a pivot auditing system now. And the water resources agent will come to your area. It was back then, I think she's retired now. But she would go through your whole water system, determine leaks, determine nozzles, like anything through the system.
Did it cost the farmer anything?
It does now.
It
It's very inexpensive. I think they did a pilot program for a little bit. Per pivot.
Yeah.
I think it's something along those lines. So it's really inexpensive. But yes, the summer pivot.
145 per pivot.
Okay. All right. I like that from where I'm at. All right. Now, I'm not saying I want you to pay for it. I'm just suggesting that that might be something that we would suggest that the state look at funding. If we're talking about asking you to be more efficient, I have no problem with a third party. And if it's close to university, I don't care who it is. Coming in and looking at your system and saying, yep, you meet the criteria. Then I don't have a problem. Then I'll be honest, from where I'm at, looking at the state water law, I don't have a problem with you taking water during the dry periods when it may not be available because you've demonstrated that you're using it efficiently. To me, that's a reasonable compliment.
So I would agree with you statewide, but for our region, I mean, we're such a small, minute.
No, I get it, but at the same time, you're either going to get a really high score because you do what you need to do, or you're going to be judged to be de minimis, which means you may be below the point of regulation, or you may not even irrigate because, we just don't have the land for it.
Mm-hmm.
But not just on, Daniel's talking specific this place, and I'm thinking, and this dovetails in what you said earlier, we were talking about extension role and whatever. Efficient use of resources or maximum utilization of resources. When you talk about education and Clemson has, I've never seen that, but I believe they had that thing. That's that trailer they had going around and did some of that stuff. Get it right, Sam? Yeah, okay. Yeah, this falls into what we said earlier about extension role, and I know it's a funding thing, everybody gets started over a pile of money, but that's what we need to work through, and if that's not our, well, I mean, we can recommend to do it, but this is what we use to, people we've got, the systems we've got, to let everybody, to try to get everybody to say, check in the box, okay, we're doing this, we can do, you go to the next guy, talk to him.
There you go.
Yeah.
And that was when I said I was asking you to demonstrate that if you're gonna want water, to be pulled from the stream when it may be running low, you gotta really prove that you're not wasting.
Well, another thing, I don't mean to get off on a tangent, what you're talking about goes in there, because you got some groups that think, when we say best management practices, and you got some groups that, well, how do we know those work? Well, they work if you implement them. But there's no, audit trail per se.
And that's what I was saying, recommend that we ask you to do that.
Or that's available to validate that what you're doing.
Yeah.
But you're tying it directly to water availability. If you're not doing a good job, you don't get water.
I think I have a harder time saying, I'm gonna let you withdraw water in a stream that's stressed if there's no proof that you're managing it well. I mean, that's a hard sell. I would think it'd be a hard sell for you to say that a municipal system is allowed to withdraw whatever it wants if it has a 40% leak rate. I mean, I would hope that at some point you'd say, no, you really got to plug your leaks.
But you're saying to get out of jail free card, so to speak, if the industry's willing to do this, okay, fine, we've done this. Now go away and bother somebody else.
And another question to your statement is this something as an educational purpose that we have Clemson come out and they give this directly to the owner of the property and they can do with it as they please? Or are you saying you want this submitted to DES?
I'll be honest, from where I'm at, there's two levels. One, I think it's a good idea for this plan. Okay, so yes, on the first one.
Okay.
If you ask me, if we get ready to modify the Surface Water Permitting Act and registration, I would ask you to submit that on the registration. It's not an onerous requirement to say that we're going, if we get water when we need it, and it's going to be dry when we need it, that we're going to use it wisely. And we've done everything we can. And that's all you have to say. You don't have to be perfect. Just reasonable and prudent, and you've done all you can.
So can you put a
And
statement?
I'm, like I said, I confessed earlier, I'm an addict to your product. I love to eat. Okay, I like eating.
Yeah, because
So I
you're
want
easy,
you guys in business.
you're easy flesh.
So I want to bring the discussion back to the implementation plan.
Yeah.
The fifth step is what we were asking about. It's basically a way to decide, have we improved water usage? Made ag water use more efficient? Do you think we need to look at that at some point down the road? Or is it just enough to say, well, we're going to continue to promote these activities and that's it? Just trying to,
Question for our region, because,
we're trying to put metrics to some of these, like, are we successful in implementing or not? And this is a way to put a metric to it.
I would say.
But if you don't think it's important, we won't add a metric.
Well, if you put a metric on something, it's almost inevitable that the next step is to do something to control the metric. I mean, if you measure it, then somebody wants to control it. I mean, and so one of the ways that you avoid control is don't measure it. Okay, and that, as a technical guy, that offends me sometimes. Okay, so but I don't know if the aim is to control by facilitating the metric or recommending that the metric be facilitated, then I think that's another situation to take into account. It's the slippery slope issue down to control, and if people don't want be controlled, then hello, don't measure it in this place.
In this basin, it's not an issue, but you look at statewide, I mean, it's, and we can bog down, but like you say, it's a slippery slope. I mean, now you do want.
I would say don't measure it. It's not an issue.
Yeah, so you would say, don't try to survey the practices that were done and look at funding. Promote it and move on. Yeah.
We're such a small, minute piece in this district or this region.
Yeah.
It's gonna sound really wonderful, best measure.
Is that true? Is that true in Edgefield?
How many farmers do we still have?
Absolutely. I completely agree.
It's the lower end of my.
There may be,
I
don't just recall very many registrations at all, period, in your basin, so. Okay, well, I think what I'm hearing is that we could probably remove 5 since ag water usage is such a small component total. It doesn't serve a huge purpose. We'll take 5 off there. Otherwise, the other ones are kind of just general. They basically suggest that, oh yeah, if you find funding and there's a farmer that wants to do something, that's great. But it's not committing you to doing a lot towards ag water efficiency. Okay, those scroll over to the left, and those are the only 2 objectives under that, the only 2 strategies and suite of actions under the first, go over to the left, actually, under the first objective, which was, and then if you scroll up, which was improve water use efficiency and keep going. Pink, yeah, and conserve water resources. So that's a good stopping point for lunch because it's 12 o'clock. I think what we'll do is grab our lunch, take no more than 20 minutes, and then we'll start up again with the second objectives and try to work through the rest of those, or as many of those we can before the end of the day, which I think we can get through it. So lunch is here, Alexis?
Yes, lunch is here, please sign in.
All right, and then online folks, we're going to try to start again at 12:20.
All right.
They can justify their argument without any real. So
that's the issue. And so, what's it? When somebody says there's game liars and there's statisticians.
Yeah, that's what the president said. The fine line between statisticians and liars.
Okay, we're going to dive back into this and hopefully move fairly quickly through here. The next objective is.
You made a wider choice.
Underneath, the next objective is called communicate, coordinate, and promote findings and recommendations from the River Basin Plan. And we've got, I think, 4 strategies here. And actually, if you go to that first recommendations tab, what we've done is we took all the recommendations that were developed over the past 4 or 5 meetings, and Grace, who's been helping us organize this and put it in an implementation plan, categorized each one of these recommendations. So the ones in pink kind of fall under communication and coordination, which is why we put them under this objective. So if you remember, one of your first recommendations was that the RBC should develop and implement an engagement plan to improve awareness and build support for the recommendations, actions, and strategies. Of an overarching, we recognize we need to figure out how do we engage others. That was a common recommendation throughout the RBCs. Water SC just put out a public engagement plan last month, and it's short, it's 2 or 3 pages. So maybe as simple as that, just saying, here's our target audiences, here's the methods we're going to take to engage. Here's how we're going to measure effectiveness of engagement. You can even get into that, but it's up to you. But regardless, that was a recommendation. So go back to the implementation plan table. That became a strategy. The first strategy under this objective. And it reads, you should develop and implement an education plan to improve awareness. So what are the actions to do that? First action, at least we recommend, is that you meet at least quarterly or thereabouts to following publication of the River Basin Plan to develop your communication and engagement plan. And that might mean that you put together a subcommittee of 2 or 3 people that will focus on that. Again, that's up to you. That was what the broad RBC decided might be effective. And then you implement it. So, not doing anything crazy here. It's just recognition that you need to meet, figure out how we're going to best promote this plan and improve engagement, and then form a subcommittee or assign some responsibilities, and that's it. Yeah.
I know that you're talking about communicates right here. Communications a little bit more. At any point, do you talk about how the state drought mitigation program works and any recommendations on it, or is it purely you're just dealing with it and just communicating locally?
If you think that's an important message that you want to communicate, so the example, I guess, is that, this group, different from the other groups, decided that it might be useful to reorganize the drought, rewrite the Drought Response Act and reorganize how the drought response committee works. Base it on river basins, not DMA areas as they currently exist. So that's what your recommendation was. We're going to talk about that in the drought recommendations.
Okay, that's what I was asking. You've got a separate.
There's a separate one for that, right?
Good.
But that's going to be part of, the outreach and engagement that you do is promoting that recommendation, perhaps. But we'll get to that. This is just kind of big picture.
I know at one point we had talked about having an interbasin meeting or I don't know, a gathering between basins across the upstate. Is that something that we pre-funded, or did that fall off? Because I think that could be an effective strategy.
Yeah, I think the Saluda has done that recommendation, I believe. And
I know we talked about it, but I can't remember.
I can't remember either, but I know definitely the Saluda brought up and said, yeah, we think we need a broad Upper Savannah and Saluda in our River Basin group.
I think Scott was talking about that media.
I've talked to Dean Heibel over at Temple Tom about convening something in the spring. I think we were looking to see if we could get a little catch up a little bit. It would be, I think the thought was it would be a little too early for us to get together before we have any recommendations that we agree on to talk about how we're going to cooperate.
Do you think that would be worthwhile to include as a strategy?
I think it needs to be. I have no problem listing it as a strategy that we should seek common ground with the other basins that we have things in common. I think, and particularly when it comes to communication, and outreach, and education, that's a message better delivered region wide through our media. Our media hub is in Green. It's in another basin. I mean, I have nothing, I'm sure you get news out of McCormick, I'm sure everybody doesn't read the Greenville paper, but, that's who that's where the TV stations are for us. Who y'all, y'all get stuff with us, or you get some of Augusta? Huh?
No, we get a lot from Augusta.
Yeah.
Because we're the upper part of the CSRA.
We get it the next week.
Next week, when the ponies come in?
Yeah.
No, I was just curious as to, but when it comes to the three bases at the top, media center seems to be green and smart, but that TV stations out of there, the newspapers out of there. To me, that looks like the low hanging fruit. Get the three bases together and let's communicate. If we're going to communicate to the public, that's the place to do it.
Well, I think we would have to recognize for the lower end of our.
You gotta go to Augusta.
You gotta go to the Augusta market.
You okay, Columbia or just Augusta? I mean, I don't know.
No, pretty much Augusta.
Okay. So there is a recommendation I think we're going to get to later that was increased coordination between or collaboration between all RBCs. And the discussion under that could emphasize the upstate as being one area to increase collaboration. I think we have an implementation strategy or action focused on that later, so we'll get to that. Okay, so go back to the implementation table and then are you comfortable with the 5-year actions that we've got for strategy A, which is just, continue to meet, develop a simple engagement plan, figure out what you're going to do and then execute it. That's pretty simple, but it does mean that you have to take some action. Got to figure out how you're going to engage, and then you've got to assign some responsibilities to decide how you're going to engage. And it could be simple, could be more complex. It's up to you. Hearing nothing, we're going to say it's good. Good. Okay. I like that.
That's good.
Okay. The second one was a grant program should be established to help support the implementation of the actions strategy identified in each river basin plan. So again, that was just the general recommendation. What do you need to do to push that recommendation? The action we put there is over a little bit to the right so we can see that action. All right. It's to require DES to identify funding needs and communicate with the legislature. There's not much you can do. You're making a recommendation. Kind of at that point falls on DES. Do they push for funding? I guess you could add an action to continue lobbying and raise awareness with your local representatives if you want to, but it's up to you.
There's one, I think the recommendation to have the legislature adopt the plan is the key. Once they adopt it, I think you have an avenue for them to lobby forward. Without that, you're like the DES is the only one with the mission to advocate for those programs. Otherwise, you're kind of.
Okay. Yep. So we just added that recommendation today. We'll maybe work that in here, make sure that's emphasized here. But again, there's not a whole lot to do just based on that recommendation, because it has more to do with the legislature deciding whether they want to fund it or not. Okay, let's go to its third strategy, C. Following development of the initial river basin plans, the RBCs will work with DES to identify the scope of future activities, RBC activities, and help develop funding needs and requests. Legislature should authorize recurring funding, support planning activities. Similar one, but this is just continuation of planning activities. What did we say then for the strategy, or for the action there? Said RBC to work with DES to identify scope for year one and DES to identify funding needs and communicate with the legislature. So inherent in that, we said that, the RBC should provide some advice to DES about what you want to do, how much you want to meet, what's the scope, continue planning. Do you want to meet quarterly? Do you want to meet twice a year? Do you need support? Or do you not need support? If you don't need support, then there's not as much of a funding need. So again, we kept the action pretty general there. That work? Okay, I'm seeing heads nod, and online folks, please chime in if you have something to add. Don't want to forget about you. All right, then the last one in this objective, use the river basin plan to highlight areas where water is more abundant and amenable to growth. Again, this is related to education and outreach. Kind of letting folks know what you found in your river basin plan. Actions were to distill information in the river basin plan to identify areas where growth could be supported with sufficient water resources. We put that as an action because right now, at least as the RBC or as the river basin plan is envisioned, there's not just a section that says, okay, here's where the areas that are most amenable to growth in your basin are. I don't know that there are specific areas. It may be just your whole base. I haven't really thought about it. I mean, I guess it depends.
It's not where I live.
No, we don't have county water. You gotta get a new place.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, you take Lake Thurmond, there's certain areas that have been pulled out of the land, but most of the land around is owned by the federal government, which is a good thing in some cases. Lake Russell, the same thing. Not really amenable to any growth.
Yeah. So again, that wasn't really one of the goals of our river basin plan, so we haven't really highlighted that. We have a river map that said, here's where water resources are abundant or where there's land that's available and amenable to growth, so you may want to create something separate, or maybe you don't. I don't know. We did have a recommendation about highlighting areas where it's more abundant, water resources are more abundant and amenable to growth.
No, they haven't found us. We don't need to draw them out.
I have a question about funding. I think maybe it's just a clarification question and I'm just ignorant. But having just gone through with another advocacy group, talking to the chairman of Ways and Means to me to get funding for a specific thing in the budget. DES has their budget proposals that they probably send up to legislature every year to do this, that, or the other. And whether we're talking about going basically around them, the legislature in some way or the other, or us talking directly to the legislature. Where does that put DES in the process? In other words, I guess the question is, should we be saying, maybe we should be asking DES to include what we want in their budget proposal that goes up the hill, as it were? Or should we be in other words, how should we ask for the money, I guess is what I'm asking. Because we're talking about funding a bit here.
Yeah.
But I don't know exactly how to ask for the money. Maybe we have to ask the DES to get.
There's two ways. When we got ready to set these councils up, we finally got to the point where we went to the legislature, the legislative committee, and asked them to insert basin planning as a task.
Okay. And then they decided to put it.
And then they
under
have
DES.
to put it down.
Then they put it under DES.
Because until it's tasked.
Okay. So that is a choice. Okay, so that is a legitimate way to go at things and make them.
Well, if it's legitimate, that's the only way
But I mean, it's kind of about.
We have an advantage that the state agencies we can lobby.
That's right, they can, I realize that.
Oh, yes, they
So if
can.
you
They have paid lobbyists.
You can help them and help us at the same time.
Well, so I don't know, maybe to keep on thinking us for your. I don't know how, I just wonder.
Okay. Katie?
And looking at this one, I would almost flip it and say, highlight areas where there are potential pinch points and focus on those for conservation efforts more than identify areas where we can grow.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that that's something I would want to highlight.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And so the broad RBC has some recommendations and actions centered around what you just said, figuring out where can we best conserve, where do we get the biggest bang for the buck conserving land to protect water quantity and quality, and other recreation and other needs too. So yeah, that's a good idea. Y'all think that's useful?
Well, I know in the lower basin, they've done it a lot. They buy up land, and then keep it in perpetual.
Well, that's what she's saying.
It's quite a large program.
The conservation plan, preserving the green space, if you will.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're modifying this recommendation.
Yeah. So use the river basin plan to highlight areas that we are areas for conservation that may protect both water quantity and quality. And actions related to that, which we can draft up for you, may be more related to actions like the Broad and Saluda have talked about, which is using like Upstate Forever's land prioritization map, Katie, that you were responsible for kind of heading that up, right? Yeah, or other land prioritization type of methods to basically do that exercise.
And it doesn't necessarily have to just be land conservation. I'm just thinking, instead of highlighting abundance of water, you would want to highlight areas that could potentially have a lack, or that would be more affected by
Growth,
growth, yeah.
depending on the type of growth, yeah. Yeah, okay. Okay,
Land
Or-
conservation.
yeah. Would you be okay if we said use the basin plan and other, and when I say and other, I'm thinking of like the land prioritization map that you developed and other sources too. Yeah, okay. Okay, is everyone comfortable with the strategy that way? It doesn't. We'll modify the actions, but it's more just recognizing that there's some existing tools out there to help guide conservation. If you want to develop more detailed actions, you're welcome to. Again, one of the actions that Rod had was to have Michelle Eddy come in to talk about modeling that could be done to further prioritize land conservation, considering future demands and future climate patterns and things like that. So it gets pretty detailed looking into the future, not just using current information. Okay. So move back over to the left. We've got four strategies underneath this. Go back to the. So this is communicate, coordinate, promote findings and recommendations. Oh no, we've got five. No, okay, let's keep talking. I'm sorry, I thought we were done before. The next one was RBC recommends that as part of the comprehensive planning process, each local government consult the resilience plan, the local hazard mitigations plans, and the associated river basin plan for inclusion within the resilience element prepared by South Carolina local region. Encourage land use regulations corresponding ordinances be adjusted to support the resilience element. That was a recommendation that came out of the Saluda, which you all also adopted. The actions associated with that are develop outreach documents to municipalities with information about the resilience plan and associated river basin plans. And then conduct outreach to planning entities, to municipalities. So again, it's just making them aware of that recommendation, encouraging them to consult the resilience plan, local hazard mitigation plans, our river basin plan. It's just asking folks to look at the plans. Guide development to improve resilience.
I think that's good. Though McCormick just got through reviewing and updating their comprehensive plan. When the resiliency piece was added, there was not a lot of guidance on what to include. So I think that strengthens that view.
It emphasizes that, yeah.
The only other thing I do is we keep, municipalities, that's typically the towns and the cities, the counties do their planning and zoning.
Okay,
It's called, you can call it local government.
yeah, so I would change under the actions, it says documents, municipalities, just say local government.
Umbrella.
Yeah.
So
Right, right there, yeah, change it to local governments.
no documents.
Conduct outreach to local governments or something. Okay. All right, I think that was the last one under this objective. So let's look at them, and see if you want to prioritize them, the five strategies underneath, go over to the left. Underneath this objective, where the last one we just talked about, which is encouraging, the resilience element from these different plans, you go up. Look back there, right there. First one was, develop an engagement plan. To me, that seems like that should probably be one of your first objectives when you meet after the plan's finalized. I would suggest you prioritize that higher. Next one's, grant program, and have to do with, just funding and encouraging DES and/or the legislature to fund these things. Scroll down so we can see the ones. Yeah. First one's funding for implementation. The next one's funding for continued planning. And then the river basin, using it to highlight areas for conservation. Do you want to prioritize any of those higher or lower than each other?
Seem to be in the logical order right there.
Yeah, we kind of did that on purpose. Subconsciously make you prioritize them that way, but
It's mine. There's no talk police again.
yeah, no one would be talking about this right after lunch when your brain's half dead anyway.
You get those.
Yeah. If you're okay with the way they are, we'll prioritize them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if you want to just say, the first top are the higher priority ones and the bottom ones are lower priority and not prioritize them, that's fine too. I'm not sure it makes a whole lot of difference, but we want to stick to the planning framework, which requires we kind of attempt to prioritize them. Any preference?
Sure. Highest, high, medium, low.
I guess my only issue with saying high, medium, low would be that it could be taken as that's a low priority.
Yeah.
To not do
overall.
it. Yeah.
So I would say strategize or say strategy priority 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
One, two.
not assign high, medium, low.
Everybody good with that?
Are they all in order? No joint?
Duplication.
Yeah. Do we think both A and B are ones? Opposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? We can go there.
I mean, well, that's a good point too. If you really feel like funding is important for implementation, you might want to prioritize that high. Or if you think that funding is more important for continued planning, you want to prioritize that one. But I think that's the only really areas where you want to put some thought into this. Is funding important for implementation or continued planning? And if it's really important, prioritize it high. If it's not as important, then just doing general education and outreach and other stuff, then maybe you prioritize it lower.
Generally gonna need a plan before you get applied for the grant.
So you think continued planning is important, most important?
That's just my experience with most grant programs.
Mhm.
You ain't got a plan, you ain't getting there.
Don't get any money for nothing.
And the plan don't have to work, because if you plan don't work, you change the plan.
Okay. All right, so Mark's suggesting the third, the C should prioritize first.
Okay, so 2 and 3.
And we still have 1 and just develop an engagement. Yeah, so 1, 2, 3, right, and then maybe 4 and 5. Does that work? Yeah, okay. Okay. Let's move on to the third objective. Almost halfway through. Improve technical understanding of water resource management issues. So this is a kind of a catch-all category of a lot of your technical recommendations. And let's see how many there are here first. There's an A, B, C.
Sorry.
A, B, C, D, E.
Nope.
F, G, okay. That's what we have to work with. Let's just start at the top and work down. The first one listed is recommends understand the potential impacts of private, community, commercial wells, how they may affect surface water, especially during droughts, or better characterize growth potential. I think again, the Saluda had a similar recommendation. It's like, just wanted to get a better handle on the potential impact of basin-wide groundwater withdrawals, and if there's any noticeable impact or meaningful impact on surface water, especially during drought. So the recommended action there was work with DES and or contractors to identify location and number of likely private, public, commercial wells in the basin and do a simple groundwater budget to assess potential impact to surface water.
You know, if you're in the last major drought record, the impact wasn't what you expect. It was that the drought, that the well started running dry, and we started getting inordinate requests to add new customers. So you created a load on the surface water system as it rolled off the ground. Yeah. Bear that in mind, look at your actions.
Well, that might suggest that you don't need to do any kind of additional analysis. Because that might suggest you don't necessarily need to do any additional analysis to identify cumulative groundwater withdrawals and their impact on surface water.
In Savannah, the surface water supplies, even when we're down 23 feet in Lake Hartwell, we're more resilient than groundwater supplies because of the geology and our, what we observed in there. We had a run on people wanting to, but with former well customers that were suddenly very interested in the quality of these water supplies.
What kind of well was it? With the old the big well that
I have no idea. It was across the board. I mean, a lot of them were in this area right here.
You had a lot of older wells, the old punch wells, the lower wave, the old older wells, and no end of will dry out then.
Yeah, that's what we've seen in North Carolina is those older wells, shallower, just not even necessarily, they're in the saprolite and may not even go down into bedrock sometimes. They would dry up very quickly. But the deeper bedrock wells, which oftentimes are just deep underground holding tanks for water, have enough. But well, again, this was a recommendation that was approved. We could remove it altogether from the implementation plan, but I'm not sure why it still exists as a recommendation then if we don't think there's anything worth doing.
Further up, groundwater wells are not significantly tied to the recommendation.
I was gonna say that, it's, in all the recommendations, what you see is a lot of groundwater, emphasis in the lower part of the state, of course.
Yeah.
And up here, not so much.
Correct, but again, I think the genesis of this was probably the Saluda, and they were just trying to get a better handle on are the cumulative impacts of groundwater withdrawals important to surface water? Was it significantly lower base flow in streams, for example, during droughts, because there's a lot of people pulling groundwater? But from what Scott's saying, he doesn't think that's probably the case in the upper Savannah. It may not be worth additional study.
I'm okay with that now. I'm okay with it.
Yeah. Okay, all right, let's take it out. Okay, we'll probably just remove the recommendation then, so we're consistent.
It may be further down in our.
Put a note there to remove the recommendation too.
I don't say, it's more the opposite.
I was gonna say, I don't have a lot of issues.
Red bucket.
Yeah.
Where's your red bucket?
I thought everybody got just.
Just what we needed.
Okay, the next one was update models to consider future uncertainties, changing weather patterns, population growth, water use scenarios, etc. What was the action associated with that, or the recommended action, or potential action? Identify uncertainties to assess and data sources for scenario development. That was the first one. Contractor to perform analysis and present results to RBC. RBC to assess results and analysis of appropriate findings. So we kept that really general. The recommendation was really general. We weren't specifically talking about the SWAM model or anything else. It was just that you recognize that there's a lot of uncertainty going into the future, and evaluating that uncertainty and accounting for variations in population growth and other water use scenarios and climate change may be important. So it's kind of general. The strategy and the actions then are also kind of general, but it's up to you. What do you want to put there? Do you want to be specific, or do you want to keep it general and have it as part of your adaptive management plan. You'll figure out what those uncertainties are later if you think they're significant. And to figure out what you need to do to address those uncertainties.
My comment about it was, I mean, you can plan for and fund for continuing monitoring or continuing, look at the problem and those kind of things. But to me, it would be better to, my comment that I scribbled somewhere was something about triggers. And the question is what, and I couldn't get it in my head what I could use for a trigger to say, hey, we need to get together and look at this. Or what would we use or what would we look at as a thing to say, this is might be coming. What can we do that? And so reconvene or refund or redo whatever we need to do. Yeah. So that was my problem. I ran across not being able to know what the trigger might be.
That's a good point.
Well, like in that sense, I always put there for us to remind people, don't be single source selection, if you will. I mean, you're reminding people that there's a number of things that can be called. It's not everything is definable, but it doesn't have anything really meaty in it.
Right.
So is it
But
worth
it's not
being
specific. It's not specific. It's general. And so I was trying to be a little bit more specific with something triggering.
I think where I come out with this. Because we're talking about something that's going to happen in the future and looking at scenarios. It becomes almost redundant to the idea that this is a recurring planning process. That in a period of time, we'll start round two. A future council, hopefully all y'all be on, probably all be gone, but all y'all still be on. We'll then have more information. And the triggers or the ideas that you would want to consider would be considered at that time. To me, if this planning process is what we envision, something that is ongoing, almost on a regular cycle, this looks like it's already accomplished by that process and doesn't have to be completed, I think.
Yeah.
Well, think about it, in the last 20 years, we've had 3 droughts of record. So,
Yeah. Well, you're saying another drought record could be a different trigger.
We
Is that
want
what you're saying?
to be diligent about this. And we want to not let, the best time to solve a problem is before you have it.
Scott, can you say with that, in all that eloquence, was that a green bucket or red bucket?
I would call it out personally, because I think we're left with, if we're gonna come back in this, and we're gonna be doing a plan every 5 to 10 years, this looks like it's already included.
Red bucket?
That's true.
You're like my dad. You can't say things in 2 words.
I never asked him what time is it.
Yeah,
I tried to hold it out.
Okay. Red.
All right. Okay.
I was hoping a man when Clemson would throw it out with me red.
We're deleting recommendations. I want to make sure, and I mean, I kind of agree that that recommendation was already inherent in the planning process. It's kind of already covered. I don't remember the actual discussion around that one, but we felt at the time that it was important. But I think you were probably just reacting to previous recommendation from another RBC, and it may have been right after lunch and we didn't think a lot about it. Everybody comfortable getting rid of that and
Yeah, no, I
simplifying?
agree with Scott.
Right.
Started your planning process.
I was talking about in lieu of the regular planning.
I get it, but I'm just thinking in 5 years, which is what this is it's unlikely that the scenario exists today or would be considered. So it's going to be something that's going to be triggered at the 3 to 5 year mark.
Yeah, okay.
We should be starting the next process at that time.
Already triggered on time.
Any gain in efficiency.
Yeah, okay. We'll do the same thing. We'll take that one out of the implementation plan and remove that from the recommendations list. And you've noted that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to C. C was future planning effort should include evaluation of surface water quality trends, including bacteria, nutrient loading, sedimentation, study the impacts of drought on fish kills due to dissolved oxygen. We did talk about this one. We got specific feedback from Katie about what she'd like to look at. And this is that big picture thing where, we recognize we're not looking at quality explicitly as during this phase, but per the planning framework, we could add that to our scope as part of subsequent planning phases. And we agreed, yeah, let's add that. So how do we add that and what are the actions to potentially add that? We said first, the RBC is to identify specific water quality issues and concerns in the basin. We listed some big picture ones, bacteria and nutrient loading, but you may want to talk about that a little more. And Why is that a problem? Where is that a problem? And then RBC to develop an approach to further address that, including the need for development of a watershed plan under the watershed program, or maybe something else. What do you think?
I like this recommendation personally. So the only thing I would talk in our 5-year plan is after you've done the first item, which is to identify specific water quality issues, I would also try to identify any data needs and to encourage the acquisition of the data that you need. Can't really do much without data.
Does it include stream flow? Characterization, so looking at the.
It's related to it.
If we have a data gap, we should start addressing it sooner rather than later.
As the stream flows drop, the contaminant level concentration rise.
I defer to my water quality expert. I'm just saying, if there's a data gap, get the data. If there's no data gap, then it's a worthless exercise, a worthless recommendation. I would suspect there's something that somebody would want to know that we're not collecting.
Did you know about?
Yeah, as it's become urbanized, so it's not just water quality, but it's quantity too. So the nature of your watersheds will change from more flashy kind of flow regime. So it's not just turbidity or water quality. You want to look at how your stream flows are fluctuating. So that might be a specific area to add to be evaluated.
Okay.
Quantity issues, so here.
Yeah, we've talked about the potential changes in the flow regime, basically just from land use changes. So that's something that we haven't and don't have the capability to look at the SWAN model necessarily. We have to do some rainfall runoff modeling using future projections, land use changes and things like that, but we can generalize it. Okay. Everyone comfortable with the 3 actions there? First, figure out what you want to look at, and then figure out where's there data gaps. Is there enough data to support watershed type plan or program? If not, how do you fill those data gaps? And then doing some type of watershed planning process. Yep. Okay. All right, let's look at the next one then. D was a percent RBC with support from technical experts should evaluate the impact of future land use changes on water resources quantity and stream flow characteristics. Okay, well, that's what we've been hinting at all along with some of these other recommendations.
Yeah, my comment was actually
For that.
Oh, was it? Oh,
Okay. Let's
I
see.
didn't realize we were on the one above.
Okay. Oh, I see. All right. So go to the 5-year action. So this was a very similar action strategy that the Broad had. And at the time, they knew what the Catawba Water Re had done. So they said, well, let's invite the folks that did that, which is RTI, to give us a talk, which just happened a couple of weeks ago about that program. And we can decide after hearing that talk, do we want to do something similar to what the Catawba Basin did, or do we want to do something different? And actually, there was some really good feedback from that hour-long presentation. They felt it was one of the better technical presentations they've got through their whole RBC process. Now, they didn't make any decisions about, okay, should we attempt to try to fund this? There was a little discussion around it. But they're going to have to continue to contemplate it moving forward. But to them, that was very useful, actually, to have that. So one thing you could do is, since that presentation was already given, you can go to the recording and you can watch that presentation. It takes about an hour. Or if you're interested, you could, part of your first implementation meeting or subsequent implementation meetings, you could ask Michelle to come in and give a presentation. Or you don't even have to mention RTI's work. You could just try to figure out what you want to do yourselves. Any thoughts?
I would personally be interested in hearing the presentation. I mean, a recording is great, but having her in person would be more valuable.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, and you can,
scratch this.
You have a link for the recording?
yeah, I can send out a link to the recording, yeah. Is it
Just go
posted
and-
already?
Oh,
Tom?
yeah. Have you posted the last video?
Yeah, it should be up there, actually, it was sent for publishing and that's right.
Okay, so it may be there already. You go to the water planning page and go to the broad RBC, go to the meeting for November 22nd or whatever it was.
21st.
Yeah, you can find it. Okay, well, we'll leave it as is. You may decide that, we can just watch the video, but we'll leave it as is for now. Or a couple RBC members might watch the video and you might say, yeah, let's get her in person if they've got specific questions or whatever, but
The 21st.
21st. Okay. Let's move on to the next one then. This had to do with data usage and acquisition. Compile the data obtained from established credible systems and align with RBC's goals for utilization across the state before creating new systems, databases, or monitoring stations. So this is one that Tanya was pushing, just emphasizes that we need to make use of existing data. In the proposed actions, I hadn't looked at these too closely yet to see what Gracie come up with. Identify funding and staffing to support development of a database. I don't know that they need development of a new database. It's more of a kind of a summary of existing data that's not already in DES's hand. So I don't know that we need the first one. I get rid of the first action, yeah. And I'm not sure if this is fair to put this in DES's court or if it's more just a general recommendation that we don't need to assign any implementation actions to, but something useful to keep in mind as you're doing new studies, that it's not right to try to recreate the wheel or go out and collect data that's already been collected. We need to first make sure that, or first need to determine if there's existing data that could be useful.
Yeah.
Like we actually even talked about it in one of the previous actions for Scott brought up. What do you think? Do you think we can just even remove this one from the implementation plan?
Or reword it. Maybe determine what data is already available.
Yeah, who would do that though? And to what end, I guess?
This was not related to the central warehouse thing. There was some discussion about having all data in a central spot. This is not that.
Kind of yes and no. I think I don't want to put words in Tanya's mouth, but we were talking about the watershed atlas and how it's got a fair amount of data there, but Tanya was suggesting that, well, there's a lot more data that could be linked to that watershed atlas that's not made available publicly. You have to request it. Like NOIs, violations, stuff like that. That was the example I think she mentioned.
But where's the clearinghouse? I mean, who does it? If it's gonna be managed.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, it would be, if it's like
They're taking an FOI to do
it's the watershed atlas, DES would have to do it, but I don't know that there's funding, to do that type of thing. I don't think we've defined enough specifics to really say what needs to be done and why it needs to be done. That's why I'm a little uncomfortable having it in the implementation plan. I feel like it's a recommendation, but it could stay as a recommendation without specific action. But maybe that's just because I can't really think of a specific action that to address it.
Well, this conversation is basically based on transparency issues and people not knowing what was out
What
there.
was out there.
Yeah, that was a big part of it.
Yeah, and I mean, I can say, there again, how and who and what and where do we do all this?
Right. Right. One of the examples was in Saluda where the counties collect some stream flow data. So it's not USGS gauge data, it's county monitoring stations, and they might not be up to the standards of the USGS gauges, but the Saluda RBC wanted to recognize that we do have some additional gauge like flow information that's not near as comprehensive as what the USGS does in terms of length, but, you know, they've been there for 5 or 10 years, and that data may be useful for some of the work that they're doing, or the council is doing. That's partly where that came from. So again, it was just recognizing there's other sources of data besides.
You got it, we've already got his recommendation, that's the implementation part, but
Right.
right now it's not manageable. I mean, it's a good recommendation, but
What that would probably mean is some private contractor or something that would be set up and hired to do the survey, to figure out where the data resides.
Yeah.
Go find it, go link it together in some reasonable way.
Yeah, but then once you do that, then it all has to be maintained and updated.
Exactly.
Continued, and to what end?
yeah, right, exactly, at what end, you got more data, and then, okay, what do you do with
Right.
it? So
I think it's a great idea. I'm just not sure what the
I don't know how to-
specific databases are and, you know, what study it's going to be supporting right now. So it's hard to put concrete examples around it, concrete actions around it.
red bucket.
I'm not suggesting to red bucket the recommendation. I'm just suggesting to take it out.
Yeah,
Of
That's what I mean.
Yeah,
Like the
yeah,
recommendation.
That's what I mean. Recommendation, but-
We'll have to get rid of the-
Okay. Just to clarify, the other two that we talked about, we're removing those recommendations from chapter 9 and from the implementation plan. Is everybody clear on that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. This one, I think we'll just remove it from the implementation plan. Okay. Okay, back, cross it out, just in case I don't see the note there. Especially if it's a note from me, I'll absorb my own note.
I know, because I'm making a note for you.
Okay, the next one was. There's 2 more, F and G. Fund all existing and future state agency recommended stream flow gauge locations. That was a recommendation we came up with. What actions do we have there to consider? Develop communication strategies for speaking with USGS and other entities that fund stream gauges. Conduct outreach to the USGS and current funding entities on the importance of stream flow data and the river basin planning process. So really, those actions are just you emphasizing that you think it's important to continue funding stream gauges to the USGS, to Duke, to water utilities like Greenville and others that help sponsor gauges. So not a lot to do there other than saying, hey, just keep funding these.
Is this with the assumption that the state agency knows where recommended stream flow gauges are?
Yeah, I think that's what we decided is that DNR, now DES, does enough work and gets a lot of feedback from many people, and they best understand where stream gauges should remain and where new ones are required would be useful.
Okay, we'll take it right.
Yeah.
But you have a list already.
Yes. Probably to be reevaluating.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. All right, we'll leave that one as is. This is the last one on this one. Last one had to do with flow ecology relationships and supporting collection of additional fish and invertebrate data in the Blue Ridge province. And the actions there were for DS to identify funding and staff for data collection effort. And DS to coordinate collection of data and development of flow ecology relationships. And RBC to review data and consider making recommendations related to ecological flow standards in the next 5-year update. The Saluda RBC's talked about this one too, not in terms of their implementation plan, but in terms of their recommendations. And they generalized it a little bit and said, well, let's just continue to discuss it. I mentioned that Clemson and the USGS already put together a proposal with an actual cost to it to collect more data in the Blue Ridge province so they could do flow ecology relationships. Saluda RBC folks said, well, we think you should first make use of existing data. So there's been a little bit of back and forth. The researchers say, well, there's not enough data to make some concrete relationships, but the Saluda RBC says, well, give it a shot. So that's the gist of it. Right.
Not to overcomplicate, but I think, and I might be wrong on this, I believe we had some conversations about engaging with the state of North Carolina potentially on sharing data. Am I remembering that correctly? And is that something worth including here?
Mhm. I know that came up in the Saluda discussions, and it may have come up with you all too. Can't remember, but yeah, if you want to include that, you can. Can't remember what Luke and Brandon from Clemson and the USGS said in response to that question. You know, do you get data from Georgia and North Carolina? You know, it's helps you characterize what's going on in the Blue Ridge or not. Do you
And I
remember?
don't even know if that's relevant for our region.
Yeah,
Just
I'm not sure either, honestly.
asking if that's.
Yeah.
Basin's interesting.
So I don't remember there was a lot of emphasis behind this recommendation, but again, it was approved as a recommendation.
It seems like I remember we agreed to include this one. Even though we didn't have much impact in our
Right,
section.
right.
But they included to support the Saluda River Basin.
Yeah, I think
So-
that might have been the thinking.
My thought would be, do we, since we're doing that for that reason, do we use their 5-year action plan recommendation?
They haven't developed it yet. It'll be next week, but
There you go.
we can keep them consistent.
Yeah.
Okay,
This technique that we saw presented to us, flow ecology relationship, was a specific way to go about doing this. Take the stream flow data, and then you measure the populations of various and sundry species, and then you do something in the data to correlate those things.
right.
And so that was a specific way of doing some things that relate to this. So we're kind of endorsing that methodology here.
Yeah.
And saying that we think it's
And there's benefit for us too on that.
worthwhile, but there may be other ways that I don't even know about to do it, but.
Yeah.
But that's, we're endorsing that method.
Yeah.
I mean, okay.
The discussion among the RBCs was that
I'm understanding.
the general discussion or thinking amongst most of the RBCs was that this approach does add value. It was interesting to everybody. It's a step beyond just the 20, 30, 40% minimum stream flow policy that's been in place for, a couple decades.
Okay.
Because it does utilize 20, 30 years of fish data and macroinvertebrate data to develop these relationships. So. Okay.
I just made a note.
Okay, yeah, we'll come back and tweak that maybe to be consistent with whatever the Saluda comes up with. So I think that's all of them under that objective, which was probably the biggest objective, or the objective with the most strategies. Let's see if we can prioritize any of these. Move over to the left, let's go back to the top. And I don't know why it doesn't like to move to the left very well. It's hung up.
All right. Well, the
Okay,
first two
so we
we've
killed the
talked
first
about.
one, second one. We killed that one too,
Yeah.
didn't we? Yep. All right, actually cross that one out too, so I don't confuse myself when I come back to this. Okay, the next one then is future planning efforts should include surface water quality. So we've got a quality one. The next one below that is the land use, trying to get a better handle on how changing land use might impact water resource quantity and stream flow characteristics. So just water quality and then land use related, and then we deleted that one. So then we've got stream flow gauges, and then the last one was fish. So what are those four? Do you think is the most priority? Quality. Katie's quality. I heard somebody say agree. Yeah.
Here.
Yep. Oh, we okay putting up one to that one? There has been a lot of discussion about land use characteristics and, I mean, changing land use and the impact on quality and quantity in this basin. So it seems like that should be a 2.
Especially as there's any growth up here.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's put that one second. Then you've got stream flow gauges and ecological flow. 3 and 4. Yeah. Okay. Easy peasy. All right, we're making good progress. We've got just 4, 5, and 6, and there's not a whole lot of strategies under these, I don't believe. Okay, so protect water resources was the overarching fourth objective. And I think there's only a couple strategies which have kind of sub-strategies in them, but they're all related to reducing sediment loading to reservoirs. And what's the item B? Let's look at that one first or second. Evaluate the impact of changing land use. Oh, well, that's similar. Develop a strategy identifying priority properties that could impact quality. Wait, that's kind of the same thing.
Let's see, you want me to go here? See if there was.
No, I think what we do is we may end up combining that with the one up above.
Number 7.
Yeah, so were those the only two? Go down again. Oh, there's another one, C.
D.
Oh, and D, okay, so D is amend the building permit process in counties and municipalities require developers work with water utilities to ensure adequate water availability. Well, and then C was identify the financial impacts of increased sedimentation on reservoirs and water storage capability. Oh, well, that's kind of related to the first one. Okay, so go back up to the first one now. Let's see everything's underneath there. Reduce sediment loading to reservoirs. Infiltration rate buffers, source studies to better identify sediment loads, incentivize establishment of riparian buffers, develop and incentivize green infrastructure, strengthen penalties for noncompliance, advocate for the development of local ordinances such as buffers and tree ordinances for new development. All right, so yeah, we did that recommendation and we had a bunch of subsets under it that would all seek to reduce sediment loading to reservoirs. So there's a lot there. We didn't put any specific actions to that one. In fact, those are kind of actions in themselves. I guess it's up to the RBC how much are you willing to do to implement that strategy of reducing sediment loading? Do you want to prioritize any of those 6 within that strategy? Do you want to use that as your toolbox of strategies and just focus on education and outreach of those strategies? You want to specifically talk about, ways to incentivize green infrastructure? Any thoughts?
Yeah, like I say, a toolbox that's crossing the various number of different municipalities or local government, if you will, to mark where. I mean, it's just one of those things that they're going to be taking care of it if they're aware of it. So, I mean, it's really how would a basin, how would you implement it when it's already covered by other people? They're just not doing it as part of their daily activities. Is that right, Mark? That already said that.
Yeah. So, I mean, at a minimum, you could just say, hey, this council felt that local governments need to do a better job with some of these things, and it's just education and outreach.
You go back to the education of local government, actually.
Right.
First people.
Right.
As far as it's like the action.
Yeah. So the action could just be work with local governments to encourage implementation of some of these strategies, or this overall overarching strategy, the goal of reducing sediment loading.
You would say encourage those to incorporate these strategies in land use, planning, zoning, and permitting.
Yeah.
There's really 3 things you're gonna cover those items, unless somebody got some other that I'm not thinking of.
Like I said, you're ready to build a house, those 3, what you gotta work with.
Yeah.
Yep. So incorporate strategies into land use, planning, and zoning.
Permitting.
And permitting. Land use, planning, zoning, and permitting decisions, or just leave it at that. Processes. Yeah. Okay. So work with local governments. It's a little general, but it's kind of ambiguous. Do you want to be more specific and say, well, we should put together a 1-page fact sheet, or we should just go to, identify 3 counties every 6 months that we're gonna go and get in front of their board and say, here's our river basin plan, here's something that's important to, that you can help us with, which is all those strategies there. And why is that important? Because we're losing storage in our reservoirs.
Approach them in alphabetical order.
Hey, why don't we do, we're leaving council of governments out of this. Why let local government have all the fun? Why don't we tell the COGS to implement this in their training program to the local government?
Well, you could put that as a recommendation.
Oh, Rick Green would love to be able to add this to his presentation.
Yeah.
What do you just, John? This is kind of a little bit in your area. Do you have any thoughts on what would be?
Threaten local governments with Clean Water Act lawsuits.
Slow down a little bit.
Took it to the extreme.
So how the attorney go?
I just said threaten.
Actually, filed. All right, it's kind of like tariffs. You're not gonna do it, you're just threatening with it.
Okay. Okay, well, we can keep it general. I think more specificity is better, but again,
And if you want to get real specific, your strategy would be to go to each local subdivision of government's planning and zoning commission to make the recommendation.
yeah. That's just asking a lot of the RBC though. Who's going to volunteer to do that? But again, that's how things get done.
I'll take care of one.
Present.
I want to.
What's the COG out here?
I know the COG does regional trainings for some counties. I know they do all the planning commission training for Oconee County,
Mhm.
the counties and the cities, so.
How many call Reagan's right? The cog, I hate to say that Mac's right, but the cog probably would be right.
And you can go right.
Okay, why don't you put, work with local governments and COGS? Or at least add a little more specificity to it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I like your idea. Mark, if you're willing, maybe you start and do the 1 or 2 that you said you'd be willing to do and see how it goes. And then you could report back and say, yeah, they actually took to it and they liked the idea and they promised to think more about this because they didn't know that loss of storage in the reservoirs was even a problem.
Right,
Yep.
that comes.
Yeah,
Yeah, gets the other issue too, like Thurman, that it's becomes involved with the federal government if we're gonna do kind of shoreline management or replanting of grass. Or whatever. You're gonna end up going through the federal government.
Well, my caveat for dealing with
I mean, streams you could get into, but
our
not
zoning
when you get around the
touch
lake itself.
core property.
I know some of the South Carolina parks have gone into planting grass from Thurman, to stop. Again, that's still state or federal government.
Yeah.
But
The federal government doesn't listen to our anyone's zoning.
they might let you play it, but they don't.
Okay.
No, it's for sure.
Okay.
Tax dollars.
Okay, so let's go back. We've got a kind of general action there. Go back to the left side. And I think rather than take up time, go down. I'm gonna combine this next one, this land use one.
Yeah.
With the one we talked about before, because they're very similar. So I'm gonna combine those into one implementation strategy. We don't need to take up more time on that. You want to put a note there, just say John will combine with.
Combine A and B.
Yeah, well, it's not A from here, it's one from the previous objective, but I know which one it was, so just say we'll combine with a previous strategy. Under the other objective. We may move this up to the other objective or move the other one down here. Okay, then scroll down, there's another one on sedimentation, but it had more to do with financial impacts, I think. Actually, what was C? Yeah. Identify So, that was a broad recommendation that they've been working on, and I think y'all adopted it too, just to better decide, is this loss of storage really significant, or over what time frame is it significant? Do you want to keep that as a separate strategy, or just wrap that up into that other sedimentation strategy? Is identifying the financial impacts important to you? We had green bucketed it, but I don't remember the discussion around it. I think maybe we had green bucketed it before we actually did the modeling analysis.
The modeling showed it's significant. So it's significant, at least in our.
Yeah, I mean, at some point you're getting 25%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basin.
Well, so it showed it was significant. It was 25%, but then it didn't result in any shortages, even using 2070 future
Well,
demands. But at some point, it is going to be significant because the cost of dredging is
Right.
significant.
Right, significant.
Or won't do any drilling, it's over 10%.
Yes, I mean, I know, of course, this falls in the core shell.
This would be the core
Yeah.
for their.
So, I mean, so you, and we all,
Disposing of the sediment.
how you gonna get the core?
Interesting.
We can talk about identifying financial.
Yeah.
impacts. Is there any lever to make them do that? I mean, it's just one of those things, a recommendation and not a strategy.
Core claims they got no money. Go somewhere new, they got no money.
You said the Corps has no money.
They say-
They get ready to do any work on the bowl. And as a local participant in the revenue, we get paid out for that share. I'm not really interested in Corps doing any work for me. Their rates for the way they're.
There are local governments that own reservoirs too.
Yeah, so there's a lake succession.
This is another incentive for them to have an interest in sediment control. Other than just the environmental
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
concerns.
Yeah.
I'm all for the riparian buffers
Um,
and that type of control. We already have one of those with.
Okay. And the nice thing about this is,
Great.
it's been done in the Catawba Water Re. We did a similar study for Spartanburg Water to help just demonstrate what the financial impacts were related to loss of storage and loss of property values around lakes, impacts to the local economy, loss of recreation value because of reduced water quality in the lakes from sedimentation. So it's not hard to do. There's existing studies where you can pull information from and apply them to your situation.
What did you find? Did you find that there was significant?
Well, loss of storage was a significant
Is
cost,
that right? The big
just
one
because
was
of the cost of
storage.
dredging. Yeah,
Okay, what cost of dredging, future cost of dredging,
right,
right?
right. In fact, Spartanburg Water got actual dredge estimates from like Dredge America, and they were incredibly expensive. Just for even a small amount that would really not even dredge, more than 10 years worth of sediment accumulation. So, okay. What were our actions there? Perform financial, RBC to perform financial impact of increased sediment. So, yeah, I don't know about the RBC doing it necessarily. Like in broad, Spartanburg took that on and did it themselves. It wasn't an RBC thing, but they presented the results to the RBC. It may just be to work with utilities or other interested parties to find funding to do some type of study. Yeah, I'll soften the first action there later, make it so that I don't think the RBC can really do much there, but they can at least encourage utilities to do something. Or the problem is there's just not that many reservoirs outside the Army Corps reservoirs here that we're worried about. But let's move on because I can't think of a good action to propose there. Okay. What was the other? Was there one B or did we skip?
Yeah, I think there's this one.
B, okay. Amend the building. Okay, this is again to protect water resources. The last objective here, amend the building permitting process in counties and municipalities to require developers work with water utilities to ensure adequate water availability.
How's that work? I've never had a developer ever don't be able to.
Well, this was requiring that,
When we come to you as a wholesale, they don't want, they're not offering. I'm just trying to figure out what, how's that gonna work?
They give you money and.
Yeah, but it's just like, okay, like in Rock Hill.
We just permitted a new subdivision in McCormick County. They had to meet with the water provider and get a letter from the water provider saying they have the water supply.
Yeah.
To deal with what they're doing. That's part of our subdivision permitting checklist.
That's different than what that said. That's just making sure. I guess your point is how are they going to work with the provider? They can't provide it.
You're asking me to say, we have water to provide, that's a different story. I don't know what they would.
I mean, that's the only way I know that they're not gonna work with the water utility, they're gonna say, you have water.
Yeah.
Available to do what we want to do. Or are they willing to pay for increased capacity? I guess that's what you're looking for.
Are they gonna dig a private well?
Is that, I mean, that needs maybe the verbiage tweaking, but okay, kind of like, okay, Rock Hill up that way, didn't, or, well, didn't York County, didn't they do an impact, like impact the
Water resource acquisition.
yeah, to make sure. And then they have to pay if they're gonna impact the rest of us and whatever. Is that what, kind of what that, to me, that's the way that reads. It doesn't say that, but that's what pops in my head.
You have impact fees?
No, we don't, but I think, what did York do? York did. Yeah, because there was so much.
Basin fees.
Okay.
There's two different fees that are out there. One is, when you talk about an impact fee, it's almost all for infrastructure. The second fee that is not imposed here, that is imposed in other states, is a water resource acquisition fee, which is that stuff that you put in your infrastructure. Without it, infrastructure. Here we only charge 5.
Okay.
The list of it's for free.
I
Well, I
don't
mean, that
remember.
just kind of goes to me, if it was tweaked, and Mark, you on this. Okay, put something in there, that's what we're talking about today. All the development and stuff that's impacting our water availability and resources, does it need?
I would agree with it if you can be specific on what you want the developer. You can define that work with the utility.
Oh, I have no doubt. That's why I asked what that meant.
Right.
I'm just saying, just define it, and I'm good with this thing.
What's the objective of this? To get people to not drill wells?
It's under the protect water resources objective.
Well, I'm not sure it actually should fall under this objective. This is where Grace placed it just for discussion purposes, but I think the point came from discussion that we had that, and I get all my RBCs mixed up, but if it was this RBC or might have, if Jeff is still online. Jeff, didn't you say that sometimes developers or specifically industry will come in and they won't consult you with regard to water availability in certain areas and you hear about it after the fact?
No, they pretty much, the development community comes to us and says, we have this project for X million gallons or whatever. Can you supply it? And usually there's a location. The problem is when there's not a location, we may have the capacity to give them 1 million gallons, but depends where it's at.
Yeah. So
That's the only issues. That's the only issues we have. I mean, for the most part, they come in and let us know. So, but along that same line, the problem is you get 2 or 3 of these coming into an area at one time. You may get 0 or you may get all 3. So what do you tell them? You know?
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I would just tell you, working with the county economic development agencies that I work with, often the water system is among the last thing. I signed a super secret to get a major industry in South Carolina. Apparently you have to go through like DNA testing and promise of firstborn children and all sorts of other things. And the water systems are usually the last, even though they may be the most significant, among the last major folks to know. That's a general.
That's one of the first utilities I talked to, besides electricity.
No, I'm not saying you, I'm just saying statewide, that is a generalized statement.
I would challenge that, whether that's accurate or not, because I work in that community for a long time.
I would go one further and we talk about protect water resources, and this is one that I would want to be on. The utility that I would want them to be that I would want to coordinate with, would be on the wastewater side. The wastewater utilities probably have more to do with actually protecting our water resources than the water systems do. We extract. And we try to protect, but the wastewater systems, I really would want developers to be working with wastewater systems, to try to get all the return flows running through a publicly owned treatment works rather than privately owned, putting in a lagoon and dumping it, or, housing development going straight to wastewater or going to septic systems. I seem to pay a lot of money to replace septic systems. That's just an observation that, we talk about water utilities. I think wastewater utility would be also something that's worthy of including, and we're talking about protecting the resource. And that, admittedly, that's quality.
I can tell you, I've never seen, that's pretty explicit. I've never seen a request for information on a development project that didn't include electrical load, water use, and wastewater discharging, and sometimes wastewater profile. I've never seen one that didn't have those three.
No, I understand. But I'm just saying, the statement that I would make is a lot of folks, particularly you talk about Jeff's comment about we'll get approached with three potential industries that want to locate, and we approve, and we say, yes, we can supply it. And then the next one hits the same area, yes, we can supply it. And the third one hits, you go, well, yes, if the other two don't all both land, if all three of you land, it's a whole different question. It's not an individual, it's an additive, simultaneous thing, and how certain. I can't answer your question.
Yeah, on one thing on this, not doing water and sewer. Y'all doing it, Ringle's doing it, whatever, but I think that I've seen it in other things. I had friends that had it. Statewide, you've got counties that don't have as robust planning, zoning as others. And some of these developers, and it's not water and sewer, but I've seen them come into counties that don't have the regulations, don't have the infrastructure. They're doing other projects in there, and some of the counties that are, unbeknownst to them, they're being mined because they don't have the robust that's able to form a Greenville. And that's what, when hearing you two talk, that's what I'm hearing. Do you need to make sure the counties are, all the counties understand that, okay, yeah, watch it, folks, because we couldn't get it.
But tap applications is the measure of growth that I kept hearing, especially in Charleston, where I used to live. So if you want to know how fast things are growing and what's on tap, there's no pun intended, for the future, just look for the number of applications that are in the document.
All right, well, I've heard a lot of different things. What do you want to do with this strategy? Do you want to, it was a recommendation that we developed based on some, and it might have been the experience or your example in McCormick about you require a letter, or a letter is required, basically, right? You want
I
to,
dare say we're not unique.
yeah. Do you not think this is needed? Do you all still think it's needed? Amend it? Do we get rid of it? I'm having a hard time distilling the disparate opinions I've heard into.
This wasn't my recommendation. I'm trying to add clarity.
What's this?
Seek clarity. I can support it if I understand.
I think it's wrong. That's why I asked what you mean by.
I don't understand it, the need for it. I feel like it exists everywhere.
Was it?
I think it
It
happens.
does.
I'd absolutely support taking it out.
What if it exists? If it exists,
It does not exist.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, point blank, in Anderson and Pickens County, water utilities are usually approached after the fact that it's all but promised that it will go forward. To ask, can you do it? And usually, if you ask in total, can we supply, 3 million gallons of water? Yes. Can I supply 3 million gallons of water there in 3 years if you've got $5 million?
I dare say, knowing the economic developers in those two counties, the developments you're talking about are the residential subdivision. That do not go through their.
No, I understand, but I'm just saying, you also have it on the economic development side with industry coming in. They will be pitching 2 or 3 different projects and they'll all be targeting the same area because you'll have sites y'all develop.
Yeah.
And you want to put somebody there.
And you know, you're not gonna
If
get,
you get 3 people vying for a slot, you have a much better chance of getting one of them.
and you know who, one's gonna get it.
Yeah.
It's
But
not
what if
gonna be
2
all, you can't.
That's
I've
not
had
what,
that situation multiple times.
I understand, but at
First
the
one
end,
was a letter
you're
of
asking
intent.
the water
First
system.
come, first serve.
Exactly.
So would it just be saying amend the building permitting process? Where applicable?
Good, yeah. There's been a similar back and forth in other RBCs where some folks say, yeah, it's already done, and others say, I've seen examples where it isn't done, and I don't know what to believe because I've heard both sides of it like 3 times now. So,
The other one, I still keep coming back. You put the word and wastewater. Because if you're not doing all the wastewater, you're missing what's going to impact water resources, particularly in round 2 of this.
Well, Scott, in my career doing this, I wanna know where the wastewater is and what's my capacity before I know anything else.
Yeah.
well, wasn't the chicken processing plant that was gonna move from West Columbia to near Aiken? Didn't that get hung up because they realized we don't have the wastewater infrastructure in place, and then they ultimately,
They're running on their capacity.
They didn't want to devote that much capacity
to
to
one
that
industry?
industry.
Yeah, okay.
My concern isn't so much the industry. The industry, you're right, you're gonna come to them for that. Mine is the 300 or 400 homes you want to add. And the counties will almost always approve the development and allow them to go septic. And I'm saying, long-term, if our goal is to protect our water resources, we don't want people going septic. Particularly on riparian streams and anywhere near the lake. Because there's no requirement, once you put a septic tank in, there's no requirement that we inspect.
Okay.
Surprise.
All right, so we've softened it a little bit based on Katie's suggestion, and then we've added wastewater. Can everybody live with it as it is? Well, there's some disagreement on whether it happens or it's even needed, but if it's happening, then people could just ignore it, I guess. It's already happening. If it's not, then it's there to emphasize that. What do we have for actions? Develop communication material strategy, promote recommendations to county and municipal officials. So basically, it's just getting the word out that, hey, we encourage developers and utilities to work together to make sure there's adequate resources, whether it be need for water or need for treatment. For the sake of time, let's leave those as is. And if y'all want to comment on the actions when you review the draft chapter, you can. Because I think we can, just with the few minutes we have left, I think we can get through the rest of them because there's not much. Go back to the bottom again.
Maybe that's the way it should stay, encourage rather than amend the building process. Is it an issue?
Encourage the building front. Yeah, we can do that. We can change amend to encourage.
Then determine, probably most counties, it isn't an issue, but there may be some that is.
Where I see, we can lower that.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Objective 5, well, let's see. Are there any priorities that we want to, or do we want to prioritize any of these 3 or 4 under protected water resources? There was one on sedimentation, the first one. Next one is gonna go up to the other one, so I'll combine that. Ignore that one. So sedimentation, that's sedimentation again, which is financial impacts, and then this one. So sounds like that's the last priority, and this one was the first priority. That makes sense. Because there was uncertainty whether we even wanted the last one, so that'll be 1, the other one will be 2, and the land use one, I think, is going to get wrapped up into a previous implementation, so it'll go out of this category probably.
So 2, yeah.
Yeah. And I can remember that. That's okay. We can move on for the second time. So go to the next one. Drought. It was drought related. And The objective is improved drought management, and we've got, I think, 3 strategies maybe. Yep, 3 strategies. First one was we recommend water utilities review and update their drought management plans and response ordinances every 5 years. Submit them to the climate office for review. We had some, well, there was some sub kind of strategies or actions underneath that about look for opportunities to develop consistent response actions and drought messaging. Consider drought surcharges, drought impact. So again, those were the recommendations centered around drought. Actually, those all fall under B. What was B there? Develop materials and outreach strategy. Okay, so really that's what we've documented in the plan. I don't know that we need to develop any additional materials. It's in chapter 8 of our plan, or will be in chapter 8 of our plan. So it's just conducting outreach and letting folks know. Rural Water already does that, so that's going on, and they'll continue to do some of that. That's probably what we have under our actions too. What was the last one, Steve? State to request the cost share and invitation. Oh, okay. So this is Harry's suggestion about comp study and especially their drought operations. So we put it underneath this drought objective. What do we have there as the actions for that? That's kind of the more important one I think I'd like to talk about. RBC to conduct outreach to state and Army Corps to communicate recommendations. So, Harry, what else can we do to emphasize our recommendations?
I think one thing, and I'm not sure, maybe it's more a general one, but I really think, and maybe in conjunction with the lower basin, we need to develop what I'd call SRB 101. A lot of people moving in, they don't really understand the entire Savannah River Basin. You know, the number of lakes, the number of dams, the number of factors. And there's a lot of misinformation. I can't tell you how many times I've spoke to civic groups and POAs and church groups and Chamber of Commerce. If we get a drought, somebody will drive over Route 28 going to Augusta and say, the river is full and the lake is down 9 feet, not realizing it's the backup to the Stevens Creek Dam. And there's a bunch of that. They don't understand the number of different organizations. It's not just the Army Corps. We've got, the EPA, you've got NOAA Fisheries, you got a whole bunch of other agencies. And it would really help to have an overall briefing that just explains the basin and all the different factors that could be, kept and then used to introduce it. Because quite frankly, most of these people don't really care about long-term water usage. All they care is the lake is done. What's the elevation of the lake?
Yeah.
And you can't just look at that and
not understand the big picture.
They don't understand the big picture, and you have to do that, or they're just gonna rant and rave and not come up with anything useful.
So what are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting we develop an overall briefing. The Corps has pieces of it, other people have pieces of it, but just what I would call a kind of introduction to the Savannah River.
Like a video, like a YouTube, like a video or YouTube.
It could be, or it should be. I've got a couple briefings I've done, and then later you can get into more detailed things. But I mean, just as people moving in, or even new people in government that aren't as familiar with the area, it's a useful thing to have.
Yeah.
Because there's an awful lot of misinformation. Like the Corps gets all the money from power. They don't understand it's marketed by Southeast Power. There's just, and that just, if you're gonna successfully argue with the government or anybody else over something, you need to have the facts, and not just a bunch of irrational statements.
I think that understands enough. Corps doesn't do anything himself. It's not what they're straight to say.
Do you want to say the
No.
base?
I don't disagree that more information is needed on the witness. I've got some questions on the first recommendation.
Okay, before we go back up there, is everybody comfortable with what Harry suggested? Is the RBC, and may fall on Harry and Tanya or others that know the river basin or the Savannah River operations well, that develop something like that?
Yeah, it needs to be done in conjunction with the lower basin, because obviously it's a signal of unity. You can't discount one or the other.
Okay, so add that as an action. craft some language for it, but mention, you know, in coordination with the LSS, develop outreach materials to educate the public on the big picture operations of the Savannah River Basin or the Savannah River system.
You know, like a lot of people don't understand that the core brings Hartwell and Thurman down on a one-to-one basin. We get to a certain point and then Hartwell supplies all the flow.
Okay,
You got people living here all their life, don't understand that, unfortunately.
okay.
And a lot of people think once you get down to the end of the conservation pool, then it's what is, goes in, goes out. That isn't true either. Because they keep going, they'll go, you can go lower.
Okay, so go back up to the drought strategy. That's what, Scott, you wanted to talk about strategy B here, the
Well, I'm just saying, I'm not sure where we fit it in, but I think somewhere. The council ought to have them.
The only reason I chose this is because this is the one place you mentioned the state climatology office. The overarching, disconnect I see in drought policy, and it existed before we split it, before we reorganized the state and put DES in charge of water and a whole new department, was that we're doing the planning for water under DES. We used to do it under DNR. The regulation of water, in other words, actually telling you when you can take and when you can't take and how much you get in times of plenty and times of drought, was always done in DHEC, now it's done in DES. What we choose through, I like to think, slight governmental oversight, nothing can be perfect in government. So we proved that by leaving drought mitigation in a department with no regulatory authority. That is not related to the subject matter on which they're acting. Why do we have a drought mitigation program in DNR if we're going to put regulation and planning in one department? That is, to me, that's an organizational problem. The one time we need coordination of resources and coordination of response in order to ensure that our drought plans work, that our basin plans work, ensure that our permits are valid, is in times of drought. And we stick it in another department that doesn't have the ability to enforce any single act. All right. The 4 stages of drought that we have incipient, we have moderate, we have severe, we have extreme. And it's a kabuki dance. We can call it anything we want, at any time we want. There's a few guidelines. They don't mean very much because every agency gets to write its own drought response plan, and it basically doesn't tell you what to do. It makes a few suggestions, but it doesn't tell you what to do. It doesn't tell you have to do something. All right, that's number one. And the last thing that really has always struck me is really the only true teeth in the Drought Response Act. If we ever get to extreme level, if we ever get to extreme drought, level 4 drought, in other words, the world is burning to a cinder and we're all out of water, the governor can take executive action. That is the only teeth in the Drought Response Act. That is the only time anyone in any agency will be required to do anything. Required. It doesn't mean you don't, because as a water system, we're going to take action, but we're not required to. All right. Farmers aren't required to. Industry isn't required to. Duke Power would not be required to until we get to the end of the earth. To me, that's a major failure in our Drought Response Act. And it's only highlighted by the fact we stick drought response in a department that's not in charge of water regulation or planning. That's my soapbox.
Okay.
And I would suggest, my suggestion would be align it. Put them in the same department. I don't care what department you put them in. You're going to plan for it, you're going to regulate it. If you're going to call for drought and you're going to call for emergency response on that resource, that needs to be in the same way.
You're going to bring this up tomorrow when y'all have your
I
meeting.
bring it up all the time. Hope doesn't like talking to me. But
We,
we're talking about a drought response. We can have all these other drought response measures that you want to put in place. They're nice. They're not worth the ink. They're not worth the electron. We don't have any ink here. They're not worth the electron that takes the storm right now on the drive.
so you're going back to recommendations. We kind of finished up our discussion on policy recommendations earlier, but we can reopen that if
I don't know if it's
y'all want to
policy,
entertain.
it's drought management, call it what it,
Yeah,
wherever you want to put it.
yeah. So your recommendation is that the climate office be moved to DES. That's what you're saying.
Not, you don't have to move the climate office. You still have climate office. I understand they may need climatologists in the DNR. I'm not saying Hope has to move. I'm saying drought management program. Nothing says she can't still be the expert that comes over, because we still have DNR, we still have DES folks. Scott Order was in the room earlier. He still reports on the drought committee.
Yeah.
We still have other departments that apply. I'm just saying
Sam
that
does,
program needs to be aligned
But
with the resource.
does this not revolve around the politics? This is the drought response committee still appointed by the governor.
Huh?
The drought response committees appointed by the governor, correct?
It is.
And this goes back, I'm saying, what you're talking about goes back to the day that we had the conversation about the politics of that and why y'all, the appointments and da. So I mean.
It needs to be revisited. The drought response act needs to be revisited. It needs to be reassigned to align with the resource, number one. Membership needs to be based on folks that know, rather than fixed criteria.
As a basin council,
It's a recommendation.
how do we make that recommendation when we have two people, when we have the SC water? This is directly done by the governor. This should be, it's done by the governor, it ought to be addressed with the
If
governor.
you're afraid to recommend change to the governor, then you probably don't need to do it.
No,
I mean,
not
you have to
afraid to.
recommend. I'm not saying he has to listen. If you think it's broke, you gotta tell him. You can't assume that he's gonna know, because.
What's he gonna do to us, right?
Huh?
What's he gonna do to us, right?
So I have a proposal.
Take Larry's power.
All right.
Before the next meeting, you're going to get chapter 8, which is the drought response chapter. And we've got our existing recommendations in there. Scott's proposed maybe adding another recommendation that moves the drought regulation of DES and some auxiliary recommendations onto that too. How about we tackle that at the beginning of the next meeting, once you've had a chance to review what's in the drought chapter. And then we can decide if we want to add something there. If we add something there, then we'll add it to our implementation plan. Because I think there's a lot to discuss and unpack there. I don't want to just scoot by it because of where we are in our meeting time. Ashley, go back to the implementation plan. The last objective, I'm just trying to decide if we should try to tackle it really quick or get you, how many strategies are there? Okay. This is much more engagement. A lot of it, we kind of already talked about under a previous objective, but I think what we're probably going to do is continue drafting this, make the adjustments that we've talked about today for actions, put it all in chapter 10 and try to get that to you before the next meeting. Let you review it. And if I don't get it to you in time, we'll review it at the meeting. We'll wrap it up. But we're getting close to the end. Go back to the PowerPoint presentation. So I think what my plan was, and go to the next slide. January, finalize the implementation plan, which we're very close to doing. We just need to talk about that last objective. We'll have sent out chapter 7, 8, and 9 before the January meeting. We'll incorporate your comments on that. And by February, we'll have a draft plan together. So we're still in line for that. I think we made enough progress on the implementation plan to be able to stick to that schedule and consider Scott's additional drought recommendation. All right. Well, thank you for your patience today. I know this is not the most exciting part of going through each one of these strategies and actions, but
One quick thing while we're here, we've been talking about, and it's just a broad thing, and when we've been talking a lot about education and outreach and whatever. True story, Apple County, talking about land use plans. Some of our government officials need to be educated as well, because I was, the last time Apple was going to update their land use plan. Our county director, who had been there for 3 years at the time, argued with me that we didn't have a land use plan. I said, yes, we do. I said, we're going to obviously get a copy. Well, by the next meeting, they didn't want to argue with me in front of everybody. Well, by the next meeting, they were updating the plan that we've had one every year since 1991. My point being is, unbeknownst to a lot of these government officials that we have on the county level, the county councils, or our county directors, whatever, a lot of them don't even know that we have land use plans.
All right. Okay, anything else before we adjourn? No, again, thank you all for your patience. I think we're still on track to wrap this up. April or May. We'll be wrapping up our meetings probably in February, March, but just a couple more to go.
It would be refreshing.